Good evening, and welcome back to Bedtime and Historian. Have you ever paused to wonder how a single human life can quietly shape the daily rhythm of the modern world? How the soft glow of a light, the recorded echo of a voice, or the steady hum of power might trace back not to destiny or genius alone, but to habit, patience, and an unusual tolerance for failure. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, let me know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The world into which Thomas Alva Edison was born did not yet hum. It clicked, rattled, hissed, and relied heavily on muscle, steam, and daylight. In 1847, when he entered life in the small town of Milan, Ohio, evenings still ended early. Lamps burned oil or gas. Messages travelled no faster than horses or boats, unless they followed the thin, growing web of telegraph wires that stretched tentatively across the American landscape. This was not yet an age of instant connection or continuous illumination. It was a world of pauses, gaps, and silence between events, and it was precisely within these gaps that Edison's habits and instincts would form. Milan was a canal town, briefly prosperous, then already beginning to fade by the time Edison could walk its streets. Barges once brought grain and goods through its waterways, but railroads were quietly redrawing maps of importance elsewhere. The town's decline left behind a quieter place, one where observation was easy and distraction was limited. Edison's father, Samuel Ogden Edison Jr., was a restless man with strong opinions and uneven success in business. His mother, Nancy Matthews Elliott, had been a schoolteacher, and her influence on her youngest child would prove steadier and more lasting. From her, Edison absorbed not a love of formal schooling, but a confidence in self-directed learning, and the idea that curiosity was something to be trusted rather than restrained. As a child, Edison was often described as distracted, slow to speak, and intensely focused on whatever held his attention at the moment. Illness left him partially deaf at a young age, a condition that would shape the way he interacted with the world. The loss of hearing narrowed his sensory field but sharpened his visual attention. Sounds that distracted others faded for him. Silence became normal, even comfortable. This would later allow him to work for long hours without interruption, moving from one experiment to another with calm concentration. Formal schooling did not last long. Edison attended a local school briefly, where rigid instruction and memorization clashed with his questioning nature. When a teacher reportedly labelled him difficult or unfocused, his mother removed him from the classroom. Education moved into the home, not through structured lessons but through books, observation, and experimentation. Edison read widely but unevenly, absorbing practical knowledge more eagerly than theory. Chemistry texts fascinated him, as did mechanical descriptions and accounts of scientific discovery. He did not move through subjects in order. He followed interest. The household itself became a laboratory of sorts. The basement was soon filled with jars, wires, chemicals, and scraps. Many experiments failed quietly. Some produced smells or minor explosions. None discouraged him for long. Failure was not treated as a verdict but as information. This attitude, formed early, would remain consistent throughout his life. Where others saw mistakes, Edison saw data. By his early teens, economic necessity and personal restlessness pushed him outward. Edison began working as a newsboy on the Grand Trunk Railroad, selling newspapers and snacks to passengers travelling between Detroit and Port Huron. This job placed him at the centre of movement and information. Newspapers carried news of war, politics, and invention. Telegraph offices buzzed with coded messages. For Edison, this environment was more educational than any classroom. He learned which stories sold papers, how timing mattered, and how systems moved information from one place to another. The railroad also offered him space literal and figurative to experiment. He set up a small laboratory in a baggage car, continuing his chemical tests between stops. When an experiment caused a fire that damaged the car, his access was revoked. But the lesson was not about restraint. It was about boundaries and consequences, absorbed pragmatically rather than emotionally. Edison's relationship with the telegraph soon deepened. After saving a station agent's child from a moving train, he was offered instruction in telegraphy. This was not a theoretical science. It was applied, immediate, and unforgiving of error. Messages had to be clear. Timing mattered. Equipment failed. Edison learned by doing, practicing for long hours, often at night. He moved from town to town, taking temporary positions, fixing machines, improving systems, and observing how communication networks functioned under real conditions. Telegraphy introduced Edison to a crucial idea. Invention was not only about discovery, but about reliability. A device that worked once was interesting. A device that worked every time, under pressure, was valuable. This distinction would shape his later work more than any single technical breakthrough. During these years, Edison's personality settled into a recognizable pattern. He slept little, ate irregularly, and worked continuously when engaged. Social conventions mattered less to him than progress on a problem. He was not indifferent to people, but he related to them through work rather than conversation. He respected competence, persistence, and loyalty. Hierarchy interested him only insofar as it enabled productivity. America itself was changing alongside him. The Civil War accelerated industrial production and communication. Telegraph lines expanded rapidly. Factories multiplied. Cities grew louder and more crowded. The idea of progress became central to national identity. In this environment, inventors were no longer isolated thinkers. They were potential engines of economic growth. Edison's early patents emerged from this context. Devices for improving telegraph signals, recording messages, and managing electrical flow brought him modest financial success and greater confidence. More importantly, they taught him how intellectual property functioned within the legal and commercial systems of the time. Patents were not just protections, they were assets. They could be sold, licensed, leveraged, or ignored. Edison learned this not through theory, but through negotiation and conflict. These experiences gradually shifted his ambition. He was no longer satisfied with small improvements. He began to imagine environments built around invention, places where experimentation could proceed continuously, supported by capital, labour, and time. This was not yet Menlo Park, but the idea was forming. What distinguished Edison at this stage was not brilliance in the romantic sense, but stamina. He returned to problems repeatedly. He kept detailed notes. He accepted monotony as part of progress. He did not seek elegance for its own sake. He sought function, durability, and usefulness. If an approach failed, he adjusted it. If it failed again, he adjusted again. There was no dramatic moment of inspiration, only accumulation. His personal life remained spare. Family ties existed, but work dominated his attention. Relationships formed around shared tasks. Leisure was minimal. Even reading was often practical rather than recreational. Edison's world narrowed around problems to be solved. As he approached adulthood, the outlines of his future were visible but not yet fixed. He was an experienced telegrapher, a modestly successful inventor, and a careful observer of systems. He had learned how industries grew and how they resisted change. He understood that invention alone was not enough. Adoption required infrastructure, persuasion, and timing. This understanding placed him at the edge of something larger. The world was on the verge of electrification, though few yet imagined what that would mean. Edison stood not as a prophet, but as a prepared participant, someone whose habits aligned with the demands of the coming age. The boy from a fading canal town had become comfortable with wires, signals, and machines. He trusted process over inspiration. He valued repetition over display. In a century increasingly defined by networks and systems, these traits would matter more than brilliance alone. Curiosity over conformity. By the time Thomas Edison moved fully into young adulthood, curiosity had become less a trait and more a governing principle. It did not express itself as wonder or imagination in the romantic sense, but as a steady pull toward understanding how things worked and why they failed. This habit shaped his decisions quietly and consistently, guiding him away from settled paths and toward uncertainty, without any sense of rebellion attached to it. Edison did not reject conformity out of defiance. He simply found it unproductive. His partial deafness, which deepened during his teenage years, reinforced this inward orientation. Sound faded from importance, and with it many of the social cues that structure ordinary interaction. Edison later suggested that the condition helped him concentrate, and whether or not this was fully true, it undeniably altered the way he moved through the world. He was less reactive, less drawn into conversation, and less distracted by noise. Work became a place of control and clarity. Problems could be approached methodically. Machines responded predictably, even when they failed. During his years as a traveling telegraph operator, Edison developed habits that would remain with him for life. He slept in short intervals, often near his workbench. He ate when convenient rather than at set times. He read manuals and technical descriptions late into the night. These behaviors were not framed as sacrifice. They were simply the most efficient way to keep working. Time, to Edison, was not something to be preserved for rest. It was something to be invested. Telegraph offices across the Midwest and East Coast exposed him to a wide range of equipment and operators. Some were meticulous, others careless. Edison noticed patterns. Machines failed most often not because they were poorly designed, but because they were pushed beyond tolerance or maintained inconsistently. This observation planted an early interest in durability and standardization. A successful invention, he concluded, needed to function under imperfect conditions, handled by ordinary people day after day. His earliest independent inventions reflected this thinking. They were not visionary leaps but refinements, better repeaters, improved signal transmission, devices that reduced error. When these inventions succeeded, Edison learned how quickly credit and compensation could become contested. Investors wanted returns, companies wanted ownership, lawyers wanted clarity. The young inventor discovered that the legal and financial structures surrounding technology were as complex as the machines themselves. This environment taught him to be cautious but not cynical. Edison did not distrust collaboration, but he insisted on control. He preferred arrangements where his authority over design and process was clear. This preference would later shape the structure of his laboratories and businesses. Independence, for Edison, was not isolation, it was autonomy within a system. Formal education remained absent from his life, and he never sought to replace it. Instead, he constructed a private curriculum shaped by immediate need. If a problem required chemistry, he studied chemistry. If it required mechanics, he studied mechanics. There was little interest in abstract knowledge unless it could be applied. This approach had limitations, but it also produced an unusual breadth of practical understanding. Edison could move easily between disciplines because he had never been taught to separate them. The broader culture of the United States during this period reinforced his instincts. The country valued self-made figures and practical achievement. Industrial expansion rewarded those who could improve efficiency and scale. Patents were celebrated. Inventors appeared in newspapers as contributors to national progress. Edison absorbed this atmosphere without adopting its rhetoric. He did not speak often of destiny or national mission. He focused on work. At the same time, conformity exerted pressure. Telegraph companies expected obedience to schedules and procedures. Employers valued reliability more than experimentation. Edison chafed under these constraints, not because they were unreasonable, but because they limited exploration. He moved frequently, leaving positions once they ceased to offer learning opportunities. This restlessness was not impulsive, it was strategic. Each move expanded his exposure to new systems and problems. Personal relationships during this period were functional rather than intimate. Edison formed friendships with fellow operators and technicians. but these were built around shared tasks. Emotional exchange was minimal. He was not cold, but he was reserved. His attention was rarely fully available to people unless they were part of his work. This trait would later complicate family life and professional partnerships alike. Edison's first significant financial success came not from invention alone, but from understanding how to position his work. He learned to demonstrate devices effectively, highlighting reliability and usefulness rather than novelty. Investors responded to predictability. Customers wanted solutions, not experiments. Edison adjusted accordingly. This period also introduced him to failure on a larger scale. Some inventions did not sell. Others were overtaken by competing technologies. Edison did not dwell on these setbacks emotionally. He treated them as signals. When a device failed commercially, he examined why. Was it too expensive? Too fragile? Poorly timed? Each answer informed the next attempt. Curiosity, in this sense, became disciplined. Edison did not chase every idea. He pursued those that intersected with existing needs and infrastructure. Telegraphy taught him that systems mattered as much as components. An improvement that could not integrate smoothly was unlikely to succeed. As he gained confidence, Edison began to imagine environments designed specifically for sustained experimentation. He envisioned spaces where multiple projects could proceed simultaneously, supported by assistants and resources. This was a departure from the lone inventor model common at the time. It reflected his belief that progress was cumulative and collaborative, even if leadership remained centralized. Conformity continued to recede in importance. Edison dressed plainly, ignored social conventions, and spoke bluntly when discussing work. He did not cultivate a public persona at this stage. Recognition mattered only insofar as it enabled further experimentation. Fame, if it came, would be incidental. By his mid-20s, Edison had become something unusual. An inventor without nostalgia for tradition and without reverence for formal authority. He respected results. He trusted processes that could be repeated. He believed improvement was always possible, even if it required hundreds or thousands of attempts. This mindset placed him at odds with some contemporaries who valued theoretical elegance or academic validation. Edison was indifferent to such distinctions. If a solution worked, it mattered. If it failed, it was revised or abandoned. The path he followed during these years was not glamorous. It involved long hours, modest living, and constant movement. But it aligned perfectly with the demands of the industrial age emerging around him. Networks were expanding. Systems were growing more complex. Incremental improvement became as valuable as breakthrough discovery. Curiosity, disciplined by experience and insulated from conformity, had become Edison's primary tool. It would soon be applied on a much larger scale. Telegraphs an opportunity. By the time Thomas Edison settled into the role of a professional telegrapher, the work no longer felt like a job in the ordinary sense. It had become an environment, one that shaped how he thought, how he evaluated problems, and how he measured success. Telegraph offices were practical places. There was little room for abstraction. Signals either arrived or they did not. Messages were either clear or garbled. Time mattered, accuracy mattered, and machines revealed their weaknesses without sentiment. For Edison, this environment was formative. It rewarded attention and punished assumption. It also provided a steady stream of small, solvable problems. Each relay, battery, and switch presented an opportunity for improvement. Over time, Edison began to see the telegraph system not as a collection of isolated devices, but as an interconnected network where changes in one component affected the whole. This systems-level thinking would later define his most influential work. Telegraphy also placed Edison within a national web of communication. Messages moved between cities, across regions, and along expanding lines that mirrored the country's economic growth. Information travelled faster than ever before, and those who managed its flow gained influence. Edison observed how companies organized themselves around this new power. He noticed where delays occurred, where equipment failed, and where human error intervened. These observations were not recorded for reflection, they were stored for use. Edison's early inventions during this period were tightly aligned with telegraphy's needs. He developed devices that recorded messages automatically, reducing reliance on skilled operators. He improved signal transmission, allowing more messages to pass through a single line. Each improvement addressed a specific inefficiency. None were conceived in isolation. Edison's creativity functioned within constraints, guided by demand rather than speculation. This approach brought him into contact with investors and patent agents who recognized the commercial potential of his work. Edison learned quickly that invention alone did not guarantee reward. Patents had to be defended. Contracts had to be negotiated. Demonstrations had to be convincing. He adapted to this reality without complaint. Business, like engineering, was another system to be understood and navigated. The telegraph industry itself was competitive and rapidly consolidating. Large companies absorbed smaller ones. Standardization became increasingly important. Edison's inventions fit well within this trend because they enhanced efficiency rather than disrupting existing infrastructure. This made them attractive to established firms, even as it limited Edison's independence. At the same time, Edison began to push against the boundaries of telegraphy. He explored ways to transmit multiple messages simultaneously over a single wire, a concept known as multiplexing. This work required careful attention to timing and signal separation. It also demanded persistence, as early attempts were unstable. Edison approached the problem methodically, testing variations and documenting outcomes. Progress was gradual but steady. These experiments reinforced a lesson Edison had learned repeatedly. Reliability was more valuable than novelty. A complex system that worked intermittently was less useful than a simple one that worked consistently. This principle would later guide his approach to electric lighting and power distribution. Edison's reputation grew quietly. Within technical circles, he was known as someone who could solve practical problems. He was not yet a public figure, but his name circulated among engineers, investors, and patent offices. This recognition brought new opportunities, including financial backing for more ambitious projects. One such opportunity emerged through his work on a device designed to record stock market transactions automatically. Known as the stock ticker, this invention addressed a growing need within financial markets for rapid, accurate information. Edison's design improved upon existing models by increasing speed and reliability. The device was quickly adopted, and its success provided Edison with a significant financial return. The income from the stock ticker changed Edison's circumstances. For the first time, he had the resources to consider long-term experimentation without immediate commercial pressure. He could rent dedicated workspace, hire assistants, and pursue ideas that did not promise instant profit. This shift marked a turning point. Edison moved from reactive invention to proactive exploration. Despite this newfound freedom, Edison did not abandon his practical orientation. He remained focused on applications and integration. Even as he explored new domains, he evaluated ideas based on their potential to fit within existing systems or create new ones. This balance between curiosity and constraint became a defining feature of his work. Telegraphy also influenced Edison's management style. He had worked alongside operators under demanding conditions. He understood the value of clear procedures and consistent training. When he later hired assistants, he expected discipline and attention to detail. He did not demand loyalty through charisma. He expected it through shared effort. Edison's personal habits during this period remained unchanged. He worked long hours, often through the night. Sleep came in short intervals. Meals were irregular. These patterns were not framed as sacrifice or ambition. They were simply the most efficient way to maintain momentum. Edison did not romanticize exhaustion, but he did not avoid it either. As Edison's projects grew in complexity, so did his awareness of coordination. Experiments required materials, tools, and documentation. Assistants needed direction. Results had to be recorded systematically. These demands pushed Edison toward a more organized approach to invention. The idea of a centralized laboratory, staffed by skilled workers and equipped for continuous experimentation, began to solidify. This concept was unusual at the time. Invention was often portrayed as solitary work, driven by individual insight. Edison's experience suggested otherwise. He saw value in collaboration, provided it operated under clear leadership. He envisioned a place where multiple minds could focus on interconnected problems, sharing information and resources. Telegraphy had shown him the power of networks. He now sought to apply that lesson to invention itself. The broader economic environment supported this vision. Industrial expansion created demand for innovation. Investors were increasingly willing to fund research with uncertain outcomes, provided the potential returns were significant. Edison positioned himself as a practical innovator, capable of turning ideas into products. This reputation attracted backing. At the same time, competition intensified. Other inventors pursued similar improvements. Patent disputes became more common. Edison learned to defend his work aggressively, not out of hostility, but out of necessity. Ownership determined control, and control enabled continuity. Throughout these developments, Edison's temperament remained steady. He did not celebrate success loudly or dwell on setbacks. Each outcome became part of an ongoing process. Telegraphy had trained him to think in terms of flow rather than events. Progress was measured in accumulated improvement, not dramatic breakthroughs. As the 1870s approached, Edison stood at the threshold of a new phase. Telegraphy had provided skills, capital, and perspective. It had taught him how systems functioned, how industries adopted change, and how persistence outperformed inspiration. These lessons would soon be applied to challenges far beyond communication. The wires that carried messages across the country had also carried Edison toward a broader vision. He was no longer simply improving existing systems. He was preparing to create new ones. Failure as daily routine. By the early 1870s, Thomas Edison had reached a point where failure no longer felt like interruption. It had become part of the rhythm of his work, as ordinary and expected as switching on a device or replacing a worn component. This was not a philosophy he articulated publicly, nor one he framed as virtue. It was simply how progress appeared when viewed up close, day after day, experiment after experiment. Edison's growing confidence did not come from uninterrupted success. Quite the opposite. Many of his ideas stalled, malfunctioned, or proved impractical. Some devices worked in controlled conditions but failed in real-world use. Others were overtaken by competing solutions before they could gain traction. These outcomes did not surprise him. He approached each attempt with the assumption that it might not work and that this information would still be useful. The financial security gained from earlier inventions allowed Edison to experiment more freely, but it did not remove pressure. Investors expected results. Patent holders monitored developments closely. Competitors moved quickly. Edison learned to manage these forces without letting them dictate his process. He maintained focus by breaking large problems into smaller, testable parts. Each failure narrowed the field of possibilities. During this period, Edison's notebooks multiplied. He recorded materials tested, configurations attempted, and outcomes observed. The notes were practical rather than reflective. They were not journals of thought but ledgers of action. This habit allowed him to track patterns over time. Failures accumulated into maps of what not to pursue, saving effort in the long run. Edison's tolerance for repetition set him apart. Where others abandoned ideas after repeated setbacks, he persisted. This persistence was not blind. It was structured. Each attempt differed slightly from the last. Variables were adjusted methodically. Edison treated experimentation as a process of elimination rather than discovery. Success emerged not as revelation, but as residue left after many exclusions. The working conditions under which this process unfolded were demanding but unremarkable to him. Long hours were standard, breaks were irregular, Assistants rotated in and out as projects evolved. Edison expected those around him to match his pace, though he did not impose it through force. Those who could not adapt simply left. Those who stayed learned to operate within his tempo. Failures also shaped Edison's reputation among peers. Some admired his persistence. Others viewed him as reckless or inefficient. Edison paid little attention to such assessments. His criteria were internal. If progress was being made, the method was justified. If not, it was revised. This period saw Edison experimenting across multiple domains simultaneously. He explored improvements in telegraphy, early work in acoustics, and various mechanical devices. Some projects overlapped. Others remained isolated. The breadth of activity increased the likelihood of failure, but it also increased the chance that lessons learned in one area could inform another. Edison's relationship with investors during these years required careful management. He learned to communicate optimism without overpromising. Demonstrations were staged only when reliability reached an acceptable threshold. Edison understood that credibility depended on consistency. A single failed demonstration could outweigh months of incremental progress. The legal environment surrounding patents added another layer of complexity. Edison navigated disputes with growing confidence, defending his claims while monitoring others. Failure in this context did not always involve technology. It involved negotiation, timing, and interpretation. Edison treated these challenges as extensions of the same problem-solving mindset. Emotionally, Edison remained reserved. Failures did not provoke visible frustration. Success did not produce celebration. His focus stayed fixed on process. This emotional steadiness made it easier for him to endure prolonged uncertainty. It also created distance between him and others who expected more expressive responses. Family life during this period reflected similar patterns. Edison married Mary Stilwell in 1871. The marriage provided domestic stability, but his attention remained primarily on work. Long absences and irregular schedules were common. Edison did not perceive this as neglect. He saw it as necessity. Work was not separate from life. It was its structure. As projects accumulated, Edison began to recognize limitations in working alone or within borrowed spaces. The scale of experimentation required dedicated facilities. Equipment needed to remain assembled between trials. Materials had to be stored and accessed efficiently. Assistants needed space to work independently while contributing to shared goals. This realization was not sudden. It emerged gradually from the friction of daily failure. Each setback highlighted inefficiencies. Each inefficiency suggested structural improvement. Edison's response was not to reduce ambition, but to redesign the environment in which ambition operated. Failure also influenced Edison's understanding of risk. He became more selective about which projects to pursue aggressively. Ideas were evaluated based on feasibility, potential impact, and alignment with existing systems. This selectivity did not reduce experimentation, it focused it. Public attention during this phase remained limited. Edison was known within technical and business circles, but he was not yet a household name. This relative anonymity allowed him to work without external narrative pressure. Failures could remain private. Progress could unfold quietly. The cumulative effect of this period was transformative. Edison emerged not as an inventor defined by individual breakthroughs, but as one shaped by sustained engagement with failure. He learned how to manage uncertainty, coordinate effort, and maintain momentum over long spans of time. By treating failure as routine rather than exceptional, Edison removed much of its emotional weight. This allowed him to persist where others might have retreated. It also prepared him for challenges of far greater scale. As the decade progressed, Edison's ambitions continued to expand. He no longer sought to improve isolated devices. He aimed to build systems that would endure repeated use under variable conditions. This shift required a new kind of workspace, one designed for continuous experimentation. The idea was forming clearly now, a place where failure was expected, accommodated, and learned from systematically, a place where invention could proceed not in bursts, but as an ongoing process. This vision would soon take physical form, but it was failure, quiet, persistent, and instructive, that made it possible. Menlo Park takes shape. When Thomas Edison chose a modest stretch of land in Menlo Park, New Jersey, he was not searching for inspiration in the scenic sense. He wanted proximity, access, and quiet reliability. The location sat close enough to rail lines and urban centres to receive materials and visitors, yet far enough from the noise and distraction of cities to allow uninterrupted work. What emerged there in the mid-1870s was not merely a workshop, but a deliberate response to the lessons Edison had learned through years of routine failure and incremental progress. Menlo Park was conceived as a place where experimentation could happen continuously. Edison understood that invention did not move in straight lines. It advanced through overlapping trials, discarded approaches, and partial successes that needed time to mature. A rented room or borrowed space no longer sufficed. Equipment had to remain assembled. Materials needed organized storage. Notes had to be preserved and consulted. People had to work together without constant reset. The laboratory building itself reflected these priorities. It was practical rather than impressive. Benches lined the walls. Shelves held chemicals, metals, glassware, and mechanical parts. Lighting was adequate, not dramatic. The space was designed to be used, not admired. Edison valued accessibility over elegance. Tools were placed where they could be reached quickly. Experiments could be paused and resumed without dismantling entire setups. Equally important was the human arrangement. Edison began assembling a small team of assistants, machinists, chemists, draftsmen, and technicians, each chosen for skill and reliability rather than pedigree. Formal education mattered less than competence. Edison expected initiative, endurance, and attention to detail. He did not micromanage every task, but he maintained overall direction. Ideas flowed inward toward him. Decisions flowed outward. The rhythm of work at Menlo Park differed from conventional employment. Hours were flexible but long. Nights were as productive as days. Edison often worked through the evening, fueled by coffee and brief rest. Assistants learned to adapt. Some thrived in this environment, others found it exhausting. Turnover was expected. Those who remained became accustomed to a pace where progress mattered more than comfort. Menlo Park also formalized Edison's approach to documentation. Experiments were recorded systematically. Results were noted without embellishment. Failures were logged alongside successes. This practice created a growing archive of knowledge that could be referenced as projects evolved. Edison relied on these records to avoid repeating unproductive paths. The notebooks became extensions of memory, enabling sustained focus across long timelines. Financial backing made this structure possible. Investors recognized Edison's potential to produce commercially valuable inventions. In return, they expected tangible results. Edison managed this relationship carefully. He did not promise specific outcomes. He emphasized process and persistence. Demonstrations were arranged when confidence was high. This balance maintained trust while preserving creative autonomy. The presence of visitors added another dimension. Journalists, financiers, and fellow inventors occasionally came to observe the work. Edison allowed access selectively. He understood the value of publicity but resisted spectacle. Menlo Park was not a showroom. It was a workplace. Visitors saw activity, not performance. This reinforced Edison's image as a serious practitioner rather than a showman. Projects at Menlo Park multiplied quickly. Telegraph improvements continued alongside new ventures into sound recording and electric lighting. The laboratory functioned as a hub where ideas intersected. Materials tested for one project might inform another. Assistants shared observations. Edison integrated these inputs, guiding effort toward promising directions. This environment supported a shift in how Edison thought about invention. He no longer pursued isolated devices. He considered systems, Each invention had to fit within a broader context of use, maintenance, and adoption. Menlo Park allowed these considerations to be tested in parallel. Reliability could be evaluated over time. Scalability could be assessed experimentally. The laboratory also changed Edison's relationship to time. Projects no longer had to be completed sequentially. Multiple lines of inquiry could proceed simultaneously. When one stalled, attention shifted to another. This reduced frustration and maintained momentum. Failure in one area did not halt progress elsewhere. Edison's leadership style during this period was direct and pragmatic. He did not motivate through rhetoric. He motivated through example. His presence in the lab, often late into the night, set expectations. Assistants learned that effort was noticed and valued. Success was shared quietly. Credit, however, flowed primarily to Edison. This reflected both legal reality and personal inclination. He saw the lab as an extension of his own work, coordinated through others. Family life remained secondary. Edison spent long hours at Menlo Park, often sleeping there. Domestic routines adapted around his schedule. This arrangement was accepted rather than negotiated. Work remained central, not as obsession but as structure. Menlo Park's significance extended beyond Edison's own projects. It represented a new model of invention, one that combined individual direction with collective labour, supported by capital and organised for continuous output. This model contrasted with the traditional image of the solitary inventor. It anticipated modern research and development environments. Failures continued unabated. Many experiments yielded no usable results. Some ideas were abandoned after months of effort. Edison treated these outcomes as expected. Menlo Park was designed to absorb failure without collapse. Resources could be redirected. Knowledge accumulated even when products did not emerge. Public awareness of Menlo Park grew gradually. Newspapers began referring to it as an invention factory. The term was not entirely accurate, but it captured the sense of sustained productivity. Edison did not object. He understood that perception influenced investment and opportunity. The laboratory's most ambitious projects required patience. Electric lighting, in particular, presented complex challenges involving materials, power generation, and distribution. Menlo Park provided the stability needed to pursue such problems without immediate resolution. Experiments could run for days. Adjustments could be made incrementally. This period also tested Edison's capacity for coordination. Managing multiple assistants, projects, and external relationships required administrative attention. Edison adapted by delegating certain tasks while retaining control over direction. He relied on trusted aides to manage logistics. This allowed him to focus on technical decisions. Menlo Park thus became more than a location. It became a method embodied in physical form. Every aspect from layout to staffing to documentation reflected Edison's accumulated experience. The laboratory was shaped by lessons learned through years of trial, error, and persistence. As work progressed, Edison's confidence grew, not in specific outcomes, but in the process itself. He trusted that sustained effort, properly organized, would yield results. This confidence was grounded in experience rather than optimism. By the late 1870s, Menlo Park stood as a quiet engine of experimentation. Its impact was not yet fully visible to the outside world, but internally, momentum was building. The groundwork had been laid for inventions that would soon alter daily life in profound ways. The boy who once experimented alone in a basement had constructed a place where experimentation could proceed without interruption. Failure had been normalized. Collaboration had been structured. Invention had become systematic. Menlo Park was ready. Invention becomes a system. By the time Menlo Park settled into its daily rhythm, Thomas Edison no longer thought of invention as a sequence of isolated efforts. It had become something closer to an operating system, a repeatable process that could absorb uncertainty, direct labour, and steadily convert raw effort into workable results. This change was not announced or formalised. It emerged quietly from necessity, shaped by the increasing scale and complexity of the problems Edison chose to pursue. Earlier in his career, Edison had moved from one project to the next, carrying lessons forward but resetting the environment each time. Menlo Park altered that pattern. The laboratory made it possible to keep multiple problems open at once, to revisit stalled ideas without rebuilding everything from scratch, and to draw connections between projects that might otherwise have remained separate. In this space, invention was no longer episodic. It was continuous. Edison's own role within this system evolved. He remained the central decision-maker, but he was no longer the sole experimenter. Assistants conducted tests, recorded results, and proposed modifications. Edison evaluated outcomes, redirected effort, and decided when a line of inquiry should be intensified or abandoned. Authority flowed through him, but information flowed toward him from many directions. This structure allowed Edison to work at a scale few inventors of his time attempted. Instead of pursuing a single breakthrough, he could pursue dozens of incremental advances simultaneously. Some would fail quickly, others would persist for months or years. The system was designed to keep moving regardless. Documentation became essential. Edison insisted on detailed records, not as a matter of academic rigor, but as operational necessity. Experiments had to be reproducible. Materials had to be tracked. Failures had to be understood. Without this discipline, repetition would waste time rather than refine understanding. The notebooks, already numerous, expanded into a living archive that supported long-term continuity. Edison's approach to materials reflected the same logic. Rather than seeking rare or exotic substances, he focused on what could be sourced reliably and cheaply. An invention that depended on scarcity was unlikely to scale. This preference influenced choices across projects, from electrical components to mechanical parts. Practicality remained the guiding principle. The assistants at Menlo Park came from varied backgrounds. Some were skilled machinists with little formal education. Others had scientific training. Edison valued both, provided they could contribute effectively. Hierarchy was functional rather than ceremonial. Responsibility was assigned based on competence. Respect was earned through results. Work schedules reflected the demands of experimentation rather than convention. Tests ran as long as needed. Night work was common, not because Edison sought drama, but because uninterrupted time allowed focus. Assistants learned to rest when possible and work when required. This flexibility was demanding, but it supported momentum. As projects multiplied, Edison refined his method of evaluation. Ideas were not judged on elegance or originality. They were judged on performance. Could the device operate reliably? Could it be manufactured? Could it integrate with existing systems? These questions guided decisions more than theoretical considerations. This pragmatic orientation sometimes placed Edison at odds with academic scientists, who prioritized explanation and theory. Edison did not dismiss theory, but he did not rely on it exclusively. He preferred to test ideas directly. If an approach worked, it mattered. If it failed, it was adjusted or discarded, regardless of how compelling it seemed on paper. Menlo Park also required Edison to manage energy his own and others. Continuous experimentation risked exhaustion. Edison mitigated this by shifting focus between projects. When one problem stalled, attention moved to another. This kept engagement high and frustration low. Progress in one area often renewed motivation elsewhere. The laboratory's growing output attracted attention. Journalists began to describe Menlo Park as a place where invention happened routinely rather than sporadically. This framing suited Edison. It emphasized process over inspiration. He did not encourage myths of sudden genius. He emphasized work. Financial relationships adapted to this model. Investors were presented with portfolios of ongoing projects rather than single bets. Risk was distributed. Successes in one area could offset failures in another. This approach increased stability and allowed Edison to pursue ambitious goals without jeopardizing the entire operation. Patent strategy became more sophisticated as well. Edison filed broadly, covering variations and improvements. This was not merely defensive, it reflected his understanding that invention evolved through iteration. Protecting only a single configuration left room for competitors to exploit adjacent solutions. Comprehensive coverage supported long-term control. The system also shaped Edison's personal habits. He spent most of his time at the laboratory, often sleeping there. Meals were taken when convenient. Family life continued at a distance. This arrangement was not framed as sacrifice. It was simply aligned with his priorities. The laboratory was where progress occurred. As Menlo Park matured, Edison's ambitions expanded. He began to tackle problems that extended beyond individual devices into the realm of infrastructure. These challenges required coordination across materials, power sources, and user behavior. They could not be solved through isolated experiments. They demanded sustained, organized effort. Electric lighting emerged as a central focus during this period, but it was approached not as a singular invention. Edison recognized that a light bulb alone would be insufficient. Power generation, distribution, safety, and cost all mattered. The system had to function as a whole. Menlo Park was uniquely suited to explore this complexity. The laboratory's culture reinforced persistence. Failures were expected and documented. Successes were tested repeatedly. Nothing was assumed to be final. This mindset allowed Edison to remain adaptable as projects evolved. When new information emerged, plans shifted accordingly. Edison's leadership remained hands-on. He reviewed results personally, often late at night. He asked direct questions and expected clear answers. Praise was understated. Correction was immediate. Assistants learned quickly what standards applied. This clarity reduced confusion and kept effort aligned. Despite the intensity of work, Menlo Park was not chaotic. The system imposed order. Tools were organized. Records were maintained. Projects were tracked. This structure supported creativity rather than constraining it. Within clear boundaries, exploration could proceed efficiently. Public perception of Edison began to change during this period. He was increasingly seen not just as an inventor, but as a figure capable of reshaping industries. This attention brought opportunity and scrutiny. Edison managed both carefully, maintaining focus on work rather than image. The concept of invention as a system had broader implications. It suggested that progress could be engineered, not left to chance. It implied that innovation could be scaled through organization and persistence. This idea would influence future generations, shaping research institutions and corporate laboratories. For Edison, the system was not theoretical, it was lived daily. Menlo Park embodied lessons learned through years of effort. It absorbed failure, coordinated talent, and sustained momentum. It allowed Edison to pursue problems of unprecedented scale, with confidence grounded in process rather than hope. As the laboratory continued to operate, its output grew steadily. Some projects would soon attract global attention. Others would remain obscure. Edison did not distinguish sharply between them. Each contributed to the system's refinement. In this environment, invention ceased to be an event. It became a condition, something that happened continuously, quietly, and with increasing reach. Light in the darkness. By the late 1870s, Thomas Edison had turned his attention toward a problem that many regarded as either already solved or impossibly complex: artificial light. Cities were lit by gas lamps, homes by oil or kerosene, and factories by whatever daylight could be captured through windows and skylights. These systems were familiar, imperfect, and accepted. Fires were common, light was uneven, darkness still dictated daily schedules. Most people assumed that this was simply the way things were. Electric lighting existed in limited forms, but it was unreliable, expensive, and unsuitable for widespread use. Arc lights illuminated large outdoor spaces with harsh brightness, suitable for streets or industrial yards, but they were dangerous and impractical indoors. They flickered, hissed, and required constant maintenance. The prevailing assumption among many engineers was that electric light might supplement existing systems, but never replace them entirely. Edison approached the problem without challenging these assumptions directly. He did not begin by declaring gas obsolete or predicting a fully electrified world. Instead, he framed the challenge as one of substitution. If electric light could be made safe, steady, affordable, and compatible with existing habits, it could enter homes quietly, without requiring people to change how they lived. This framing shaped every decision that followed. The task was far more complex than producing light itself. Edison understood early that a successful solution would require an entire system: a durable lamp, a reliable power source, a method of distribution, safety mechanisms, and economic viability. Each component depended on the others. Improving one in isolation would not be enough. Work at Menlo Park intensified. Experiments multiplied. Assistants tested materials relentlessly, searching for a filament that could glow steadily without burning out. Metals were tried and discarded. Organic materials were carbonized and tested. Thousands of combinations were examined. Many failed almost immediately. Others lasted minutes, then hours, then slightly longer. Progress was measured in increments. Edison's notebooks from this period reflect a methodical narrowing of possibilities. Each failure eliminated an option. Each partial success suggested a new direction. Edison did not interpret setbacks emotionally. A filament that burned out after 30 minutes was not a disappointment. It was a data point. The goal was endurance, not brilliance. At the same time, Edison worked on power generation. He explored dynamos, capable of producing steady current suitable for indoor use. Existing generators were designed for industrial purposes and produced inconsistent output. Edison sought control and predictability. Voltage had to be managed carefully. Safety was paramount. Fires or shocks would undermine public trust immediately. Distribution posed another challenge. Power had to travel from generators to lamps through wires without significant loss. Edison studied resistance, insulation, and network design. He observed gas infrastructure closely, noting how pipes delivered fuel to homes. He envisioned electric lines functioning similarly, hidden from view, reliable and unobtrusive. This systems approach set Edison apart from competitors who focused narrowly on individual components. He did not dismiss their work, but he saw its limitations. A superior lamp meant little without power. A powerful generator meant little without safe distribution. Edison pursued integration relentlessly. The pace at Menlo Park accelerated. Assistants worked in shifts. Experiments ran continuously. Edison slept irregularly, often on a bench or chair, waking to review results and issue new instructions. Fatigue was present, but secondary. Momentum mattered more. Public interest began to stir. Newspapers reported rumours of progress. Visitors arrived seeking glimpses of the work. Edison managed access carefully. He did not stage demonstrations prematurely. Failure in public would damage credibility. He waited until results were repeatable. Financial pressure increased alongside attention. Investors expected breakthroughs. Edison communicated cautiously, emphasizing effort rather than promises. He understood that lighting was not a single invention but an evolving system. Timelines were uncertain. He resisted deadlines that did not reflect reality. The search for a practical filament consumed months. Edison tested thousands of materials, including cotton, paper, bamboo, and various plant fibers. Each was carbonized and evaluated. The process was tedious and repetitive. It required patience and meticulous documentation. Assistants recorded burn times, brightness, and stability. Patterns emerged slowly. Eventually, a carbonized bamboo filament demonstrated the endurance Edison sought. It burned steadily for many hours, meeting the threshold required for practical use. This was not the end of the problem, but it marked a turning point. The lamp could now be treated as a reliable component rather than an experiment. With this foundation, Edison intensified work on the surrounding system. Sockets, switches, wiring standards, and safety devices were developed and refined. Edison considered how users would interact with the technology. Lamps had to be easy to replace. Controls had to be intuitive. The system had to feel familiar. Edison's attention to user experience was deliberate. He did not expect people to learn new habits eagerly. He designed electric lighting to resemble gas lighting as closely as possible in form and function. This reduced resistance and eased adoption. As confidence grew, Edison prepared for public demonstration. He selected Menlo Park itself as the site. The choice was symbolic but practical. The laboratory could showcase not just individual lamps, but an integrated system. Generators, wiring, and fixtures could be observed working together. On the evening of the demonstration, electric lamps illuminated buildings and grounds with steady, warm light. Visitors arrived by train, walking through spaces lit without flame or smoke. The effect was striking not because it was dramatic, but because it was calm and reliable. The light did not flicker. It did not demand attention. It simply worked. Reports spread quickly. Newspapers described the scene in measured terms. Investors took notice. Skeptics acknowledged the achievement, even if they questioned scalability. Edison did not claim final victory. He emphasized that work continued. Behind the scenes, challenges remained. Scaling production introduced new variables. Materials behaved differently at larger volumes. Distribution networks had to be extended beyond controlled environments. Maintenance protocols had to be established. Edison approached these problems with the same methodical persistence. Criticism emerged from proponents of alternative electrical systems. Some argued that Edison's approach was inefficient or limited in range. Others questioned economic feasibility. Edison responded through demonstration rather than debate. He continued refining the system, addressing weaknesses incrementally. The cultural impact of electric light began to take shape. Businesses extended hours, streets became safer, homes felt less constrained by daylight. These changes occurred gradually, without ceremony. Edison did not frame them as transformation. They were presented as improvements. Throughout this period, Edison's demeanor remained consistent. He did not celebrate publicly or retreat privately. Work continued. Problems were addressed. Systems were tested. The novelty of light gave way to the discipline of infrastructure. Menlo Park, once a quiet laboratory, became a focal point of technological change. Yet Edison resisted turning it into a monument. He saw it as a working environment, subject to revision. When limitations emerged, he adapted. Electric light did not emerge fully formed. It entered the world through persistence, adjustment, and system building. Edison's role was not that of a solitary genius illuminating darkness with insight. It was that of an organizer, experimenter, and integrator who treated light as a problem to be managed rather than conquered. As installations expanded beyond Menlo Park, Edison turned his attention toward broader deployment. Cities posed new challenges. Infrastructure had to scale. Regulatory concerns emerged. Competition intensified. Edison approached these developments with cautious determination. Light, once dependent on flame, now flowed through wires. Darkness receded not through spectacle, but through steady application. Edison's system worked, not because it was perfect, but because it was adaptable. The darkness had not vanished, but it had been pushed back, methodically and quietly, by a system built to endure. Power, grids, and control. As electric light moved from demonstration to deployment, Thomas Edison's attention shifted decisively toward power itself. Light had proven possible. The greater challenge now was consistency, how to deliver electricity reliably, safely, and affordably to many users at once. This was not a question of invention alone. It was a question of organization, infrastructure, and control. Edison understood that the success of electric lighting would depend less on the lamp than on the system that fed it. The existing landscape offered few models. Gas companies operated localized networks, supplying fuel through pipes that rarely extended far beyond city centers. Electricity behaved differently. Loss increased with distance. Materials imposed limits. Safety concerns multiplied as voltage rose. Edison approached these realities pragmatically. He did not attempt to overcome them through theory. He worked within them, designing a system that fit known constraints. Central to Edison's approach was the use of direct current. This choice reflected both technical understanding and strategic judgment. Direct current systems were simpler to manage at the voltages Edison considered safe for indoor use. They allowed for predictable behavior and straightforward measurement. While direct current limited transmission distance, Edison viewed this not as a flaw but as a boundary to be accommodated. The solution was decentralization. Instead of a single large generator serving an entire city, Edison envisioned multiple local power stations distributed across urban areas. Each station would supply electricity to a defined neighborhood. This mirrored the structure of gas networks and aligned with Edison's preference for manageable systems. Problems could be isolated, maintenance could be localized, expansion could proceed incrementally. Designing these stations required careful planning. Generators had to operate continuously and reliably. Fuel supply had to be secured. Heat management and noise reduction mattered, particularly in dense urban settings. Edison worked closely with engineers and machinists to refine generator design, focusing on durability and ease of maintenance rather than peak performance. Distribution networks presented another layer of complexity. Wires had to be insulated, routed safely, and protected from damage. Edison studied materials extensively, testing insulation compounds under varied conditions. He considered environmental exposure, wear, and cost. The goal was not perfection, but adequacy sustained over time. Meters became essential. Customers needed to be billed accurately. Edison developed measurement devices that tracked consumption reliably without requiring constant oversight. This practical concern reinforced his view that technology had to integrate seamlessly into daily life. Users should not need technical knowledge to participate. Edison's insistence on system-level integration extended to installation practices. He standardized components where possible, reducing variation that could introduce failure. This standardization facilitated training, maintenance, and scaling. It also reinforced Edison's control over the network. Compatibility ensured dependence. The first major test of this approach came with the development of a central power station serving a commercial district. Edison selected a location where demand was concentrated and visibility was high. The station supplied electricity to multiple customers through an underground network. Performance was monitored closely. Adjustments were made in real time. This deployment revealed challenges Edison had anticipated and others had underestimated. Demand fluctuated. Equipment required constant attention. Unexpected interactions occurred between components. Edison responded by refining procedures rather than redesigning the entire system. Operators were trained to manage variation. Redundancies were added where feasible. Public response was cautious but positive. Electric light proved steady and convenient. Businesses appreciated extended hours. Safety concerns eased as systems operated without incident. Edison emphasized reliability in communications, reinforcing trust. Behind this progress lay significant organizational effort. Edison coordinated engineers, construction crews, inspectors, and administrators. This required delegation and oversight. He relied increasingly on trusted associates to manage daily operations, freeing him to focus on strategic decisions. Competition intensified as other electrical systems emerged. Some advocated higher voltages to extend transmission range. Others proposed alternative current forms. Edison monitored these developments closely, but remained committed to his approach. He believed that safety, simplicity, and incremental expansion would prevail over technical ambition. This commitment shaped Edison's public stance. He framed electricity as a service rather than a spectacle. Marketing emphasized comfort, cleanliness, and predictability. Edison avoided dramatic claims. He presented electric power as a natural extension of existing utilities. Regulatory environments varied by city. Edison navigated municipal approvals, property rights, and public concerns. He approached these interactions methodically, providing demonstrations and data. Trust was built through transparency rather than persuasion. The growing network required ongoing maintenance. Edison established protocols for inspection and repair. Failures were documented and analyzed. Improvements were implemented systematically. The grid evolved through experience rather than redesign. Edison's focus on control extended to intellectual property. Patents covered not only devices but system configurations. This comprehensive approach protected investment and limited competitors' ability to replicate the network easily. Legal challenges emerged, but Edison defended his claims persistently. The human dimension of the grid also mattered. Operators, technicians, and installers formed a new workforce. Edison valued training and consistency. Procedures were codified. Expectations were clear. This professionalization supported reliability. As networks expanded, Edison faced the limits of his chosen system. Distance constrained growth. Urban density imposed practical boundaries. Edison responded by planning additional stations rather than increasing transmission range. This solution worked within cities but proved less adaptable to rural areas. Edison accepted these limitations. He did not seek universal coverage immediately. He focused on environments where his system functioned best. Expansion followed demand rather than ambition. The grid thus developed as a patchwork of localized systems. Each station served its area. Together, they formed a network that could grow incrementally. This approach aligned with Edison's broader philosophy: progress through accumulation rather than transformation. Public perception of electricity shifted during this period. What had once seemed experimental became routine. Lights turned on at the flip of a switch. Power flowed predictably. Edison considered this normalization a success. Technology, in his view, should recede into the background. Despite increasing complexity, Edison maintained involvement in technical decisions. He reviewed reports, visited installations, and evaluated performance. His presence reinforced standards and signaled commitment, yet he increasingly relied on organizational structures to sustain operations. The grid's development marked a transition in Edison's career. He moved from laboratory-focused invention to large-scale implementation. This required different skills and introduced new pressures. Decisions carried broader consequences. Failures affected many users. Edison adapted by emphasizing caution. Changes were tested before deployment. Risks were assessed. Stability took precedence over speed. This conservatism frustrated some observers but preserved trust. As the system matured, Edison confronted a reality he could not fully control: the emergence of alternative approaches. Competing systems promised greater range and efficiency. Edison acknowledged their existence but remained focused on refining his own. Power, once a theoretical concern, had become a practical service. Edison's grid delivered it quietly, reliably, and within known limits. Control was exercised through design, standardization, and organization rather than force. The network was not perfect. It required constant attention. It faced competition and constraint. Yet it functioned, and in functioning, it changed daily life. Edison had not merely created devices. He had helped establish a new form of infrastructure, one that embedded technology into the rhythms of cities and routines of people. This achievement rested not on dramatic innovation, but on sustained effort and careful control. As the grid expanded, new conflicts loomed. technical disagreements would soon intersect with business rivalry and public debate. Edison's system faced challenges not just of engineering, but of ideology and scale. The wires were in place. Power flowed. Control was maintained for now. The war of currents. As electric power networks expanded, disagreements that had once remained technical began to surface publicly. What had previously been debates among engineers and investors gradually became matters of business strategy, municipal policy, and public perception. At the center of these tensions stood Thomas Edison, whose direct current system had moved from experimental novelty to operational reality. Opposing it with increasing confidence were advocates of alternating current who argued that different technical choices would better serve a rapidly electrifying world. Edison did not experience this conflict as a sudden confrontation. It emerged gradually, shaped by geography, economics, and scale. Direct current systems functioned well within the dense urban environments for which Edison had designed them. They were predictable, relatively easy to understand, and aligned with his emphasis on safety. Alternating current systems, by contrast, promised efficient transmission over longer distances using higher voltages that could be stepped up or down through transformers. This capability suggested broader coverage with fewer generating stations. To Edison, these claims raised concerns rather than excitement. High voltage, in his assessment, increased risk. He worried about accidents, fires, and loss of public trust. He also understood that systems optimized for distance might compromise control at the local level. Edison's philosophy favored manageable units over expansive reach. He believed reliability emerged from limitation rather than ambition. The disagreement was not purely technical. Business interests amplified it. Companies aligned with different systems competed for contracts, municipal approvals, and investor confidence. Each approach represented not only an engineering solution, but a vision of how electricity should be produced, distributed, and governed. Edison's system emphasized local control and incremental expansion. Alternating current systems suggested centralized generation and broader distribution. Public understanding of these differences was limited. Electricity remained unfamiliar to most people. Its dangers were poorly understood. Accidents, when they occurred, attracted attention disproportionate to their frequency. Edison recognized that perception would shape adoption as much as performance. In response, Edison adopted a cautious but firm public stance. He emphasized the safety of his system repeatedly, highlighting its lower voltages and predictable behavior. He avoided abstract arguments, focusing instead on concrete outcomes. Direct current, he asserted, worked quietly and reliably within homes and businesses. It did not require users to confront unfamiliar risks. Advocates of alternating current countered with demonstrations of efficiency and reach. They showcased the ability to transmit power across greater distances with reduced loss. This appealed particularly to regions beyond dense city centres. Rural areas and smaller towns saw potential advantages in systems that did not require numerous local stations. As these debates intensified, Edison found himself navigating unfamiliar terrain. Technical merit alone no longer determined success. Legal frameworks, political relationships, and public opinion played increasing roles. Edison engaged these arenas selectively. He provided testimony when asked, supported demonstrations aligned with his system, and defended his patents vigorously. One of the most troubling aspects of the conflict, from Edison's perspective, was the portrayal of risk. Accidents involving electricity, regardless of system, threatened the credibility of the entire field. Edison believed that emphasizing safety was not merely strategic, but ethical. He feared that premature or careless deployment of high-voltage systems could provoke backlash that would slow electrification overall. In this environment, lines between caution and competition blurred. Edison's efforts to highlight the dangers of alternating current were interpreted by some as defensive or self-serving. Supporters argued that he was protecting the public. Critics accused him of resisting progress. Edison did not engage these characterizations directly. He focused on reinforcing his system's stability. The conflict extended into municipal decision-making. Cities faced choices about which systems to adopt. These decisions carried long-term implications, as infrastructure investments were difficult to reverse. Edison worked closely with city officials, providing data and demonstrations. He emphasized the proven performance of existing installations. Alternating current proponents pursued similar strategies, often backed by substantial capital. The competition drove rapid experimentation and deployment. Each side sought to establish footholds that would shape future expansion. Within Edison's organizations, the conflict prompted internal reflection. Engineers assessed the limits of direct current more critically. Discussions emerged about potential adaptations. Edison listened, but remained unconvinced that the risks of high-voltage transmission were justified. He valued control and predictability over reach. The public narrative, meanwhile, grew more dramatic than Edison preferred. Newspapers framed the disagreement as a battle between rival visions. Personalities were emphasized, technical nuance was lost. Edison found himself cast as a central figure in a story larger than his intentions. Despite this attention, Edison's daily routine changed little. He continued to review reports, visit installations, and refine processes. The conflict did not halt operations. Direct current systems expanded where conditions favored them. Edison measured success in functioning networks rather than headlines. Over time, the advantages of alternating current for long-distance transmission became increasingly evident. Edison acknowledged these realities privately, even as he maintained public support for his system. He understood that no single approach would dominate every context. Yet he resisted conceding ground prematurely. This tension reflected a broader shift in Edison's career. He was no longer operating solely as an inventor or system builder. He was now a participant in large-scale technological governance, where decisions affected millions and unfolded over decades. The pace was slower, outcomes were less controllable. Edison's commitment to direct current was shaped by more than technical judgment. It reflected his accumulated experience. He trusted systems he could observe directly, manage incrementally, and maintain locally. Alternating current represented a leap toward abstraction, where control was diffused across distance and complexity. The conflict did not resolve quickly. Both systems coexisted, each finding niches where it excelled. Edison continued refining his installations, improving efficiency and reliability within their operational range. He did not abandon innovation. He simply applied it within established boundaries. As years passed, the debate's intensity softened. Practical considerations guided adoption more than ideology. Regions selected systems that fit their geography and demand. Electricity became less mysterious and more routine. The stakes shifted from proof of concept to cost and maintenance. For Edison, the war of currents marked a transition from pioneering to defending. He had helped introduce electric power to daily life. Now he worked to sustain and justify his approach amid growing alternatives. This required resilience rather than invention. The conflict also reshaped Edison's public image. He was no longer seen solely as a bringer of light, but as a figure embedded in controversy. Some admired his caution, others viewed it as resistance. Edison accepted these perceptions with characteristic reserve. What mattered to him was function. Direct current systems continued to operate safely and reliably where installed. Lights turned on, power flowed, users remained satisfied. These outcomes validated his priorities, even as the broader landscape diversified. The war of currents did not end with a single victory or defeat. It concluded gradually, through accumulation of experience and adaptation. Edison's role in it was complex, shaped by conviction, caution, and circumstance. In navigating this conflict, Edison demonstrated a different kind of persistence. He held to principles formed through years of practical engagement, even as the world around him explored alternative paths. He did not seek to dominate every future. He sought to preserve the one he had built. The wires continued to carry power. Systems evolved. The debate faded into history. What remained were networks that served daily life, shaped by choices made under uncertainty. For Edison, the war of currents was not a dramatic clash, but a prolonged negotiation between possibility and restraint. It tested his ability to adapt without abandoning his core approach. As the electrical landscape stabilized, new challenges emerged, fame increased, expectations shifted. Edison's work entered a phase defined less by creation and more by consequence. The conflict had passed its peak. The system endured. And Edison, steady as ever, moved forward. Fame, myth, and press. By the time the most visible conflicts over electrical systems began to settle into coexistence, Thomas Edison had entered a phase of life defined less by invention alone and more by attention. The work continued, steadily and without pause, but it now unfolded beneath a growing layer of public narrative. Newspapers, magazines, and popular journals increasingly treated Edison not just as a technical figure, but as a symbol and embodiment of modern progress, industrial discipline, and American ingenuity. This transformation did not occur by his design, nor did it align comfortably with his temperament. Edison had never cultivated mystery. He documented his work meticulously, spoke plainly, and preferred demonstration to declaration. Yet the public image that formed around him simplified these habits into a more dramatic story. He was presented as a solitary genius, a tireless worker who conjured inventions through sheer will. This image ignored the collaborative structure of his laboratories, the routine nature of failure, and the administrative labor that sustained progress. Edison did not actively correct these distortions. He found them irrelevant to the work at hand. The press, however, required narrative. Journalists sought clear protagonists and decisive moments. Edison provided both, even unintentionally. His public demonstrations of electric light had been visually compelling. His conflicts with rival systems offered tension. His relentless work schedule fed a mythology of endurance. These elements combined into a story that was easy to tell and easy to repeat. Edison's response to this attention was measured. He granted interviews selectively and kept his remarks focused on process rather than prediction. He avoided philosophical statements about the future. When asked about inspiration, he emphasized effort. When asked about genius, he redirected attention to persistence. These answers did little to dismantle the myth. Instead, they reinforced it by portraying Edison as modest and disciplined. Fame altered the conditions under which Edison worked. Visitors increased. Requests for commentary multiplied. Investors and politicians sought association. Edison managed access carefully, allowing exposure when it served practical goals and declining it when it threatened focus. Menlo Park, once relatively secluded, became a destination. Edison tolerated this shift without embracing it. The attention also reshaped expectations. Each new project was now anticipated as a potential breakthrough. Incremental improvements attracted less notice. Edison continued pursuing them nonetheless. He did not adjust his standards to match public appetite. If anything, the pressure reinforced his preference for caution. He released developments only when they met internal criteria, regardless of external demand. This period revealed the tension between public perception and private practice. While the press celebrated dramatic innovation, Edison's work increasingly involved refinement, scaling, and maintenance. These tasks were essential but unglamorous. They did not lend themselves to headlines. Edison accepted this mismatch as unavoidable. The myth of Edison as a lone inventor also obscured the contributions of his assistants and collaborators. Within the laboratory, this imbalance was understood and accepted. Roles were defined contractually and culturally. Edison held primary credit, both legally and publicly. Assistants were compensated and valued, but rarely acknowledged externally. This arrangement reflected the norms of the time and Edison's belief in centralized direction. Public fascination with Edison extended beyond technology into personality. Stories circulated about his sleep habits, his indifference to social conventions, and his single-minded focus. Some were exaggerated, others were accurate but stripped of context. Edison did not attempt to curate these stories. He viewed them as distractions from work. The growing myth had practical consequences. Edison's name became a brand. Products associated with him carried implicit credibility. This benefited his enterprises, attracting customers and partners. Edison recognized this advantage and allowed it to operate, even as he remained personally detached from the image. At the same time, the myth created vulnerability. Failures now attracted disproportionate scrutiny. Setbacks were interpreted as signs of decline or misjudgment. Edison managed these moments with the same reserve he applied to success. He did not explain extensively. He adjusted and moved forward. The press also shaped public understanding of invention itself. Edison's story suggested that progress emerged from individual brilliance rather than collective effort. This narrative resonated culturally but distorted reality. Edison did not challenge it publicly, but within his organizations, he continued emphasizing teamwork and system building. As Edison's fame grew, so did the scale of his operations. Corporate structures expanded. Legal and administrative responsibilities increased. Edison delegated more, relying on managers and executives to handle day-to-day affairs. This delegation allowed him to focus on technical direction, but also distanced him from some operational details. The public image of Edison as tireless and omnipresent contrasted with his actual role, which had become more selective. He reviewed key projects, set priorities, and intervened when necessary. He no longer personally conducted every experiment. This shift was practical, not symbolic. It reflected the maturation of his enterprises. Fame also influenced Edison's interactions with peers. Other inventors were measured against him, often unfairly. Edison did not seek to dominate this landscape. He continued to respect competence and results wherever they appeared. Rivalries existed, but they were shaped more by business competition than personal animosity. The myth of Edison as a singular figure also obscured his adaptability. Public narratives portrayed him as rigid or dogmatic, particularly in technical debates. In practice, Edison adjusted continuously within his chosen frameworks. He refined systems, adopted improvements, and modified strategies as evidence accumulated. What he resisted were abrupt shifts that compromised reliability. Edison's relationship with the press remained transactional. He understood its power but did not court it. He provided access when it aligned with strategic goals, such as securing investment or municipal support. Otherwise, he limited engagement. This approach maintained a degree of control over narrative without consuming time. The cultural moment amplified Edison's visibility. Industrialization had created a public appetite for figures who embodied progress. Edison fit this role precisely because his work produced tangible, everyday benefits. Light, sound recording, and power were experiences people could see and use. This grounded his fame in function rather than abstraction. Yet the simplification inherent in myth carried long-term implications. It set expectations for invention that few could meet. It framed progress as the product of exceptional individuals rather than sustained systems. Edison's own career contradicted this narrative, but the contradiction remained largely unexamined. Within Edison's personal life, fame had limited impact. His routines remained unchanged. Work dominated his schedule. Social obligations were minimized. Family interactions continued at the margins. Edison did not seek public validation. He sought progress, measured internally. As years passed, the myth solidified. Edison became a reference point, invoked in discussions of innovation and industry. This status brought honor and influence, but also fixed perceptions. Edison accepted this without enthusiasm. He did not resist being seen as a symbol, but he did not act to preserve it either. The press continued to follow his work, sometimes misunderstanding its nature. Incremental improvements were overlooked. Dramatic narratives were favored. Edison navigated this environment with steady detachment. The intersection of fame and work introduced new challenges. Decisions now carried reputational weight. Missteps could affect not only projects but public trust. Edison responded by emphasizing stability and caution. He preferred proven methods to experimental leaps in public-facing projects. Despite these pressures, Edison's fundamental approach remained unchanged. He continued to view invention as a process grounded in effort, iteration, and organization. Fame did not alter his criteria for success. The myth of Edison would endure, reshaped by historians and storytellers over time. But during this period, Edison himself remained focused on the present. Projects continued. Systems evolved. Attention flowed around him without diverting his course. As the public narrative settled into place, Edison's work entered a new phase. Innovation would now be judged not only by novelty, but by legacy. The systems he had helped establish would outlast individual projects. Fame, once peripheral, had become part of the environment. Edison moved within it as he moved within his laboratories with awareness, caution, and minimal indulgence. The story others told about him grew louder. The work itself continued quietly. Motion, sound, memory. Long before the public associated Thomas Edison primarily with electric light, he had been drawn to another problem that seemed, at first, almost incidental. Sound, unlike light or power, left no trace. It passed through the air and vanished. Words spoken were lost the moment they were heard. Music existed only as long as it was played. To Edison, this impermanence represented not a philosophical puzzle but a technical one. If sound could be transmitted through wires, as in the telephone and telegraph, then perhaps it could also be captured, preserved, and reproduced. This idea did not emerge suddenly. It grew out of Edison's telegraph work, particularly his experiments with automatic recording devices. Telegraph signals were already being inscribed onto paper tape in the form of marks and indentations. These marks represented electrical impulses rather than sound waves, but the conceptual leap was small. If vibrations could be translated into physical impressions, then reversed, sound might be made durable. Edison approached the problem as he approached most others, indirectly through related needs. He was initially interested in improving telegraph efficiency and creating devices that could record messages automatically for later playback. Voice was not the primary objective, recording information was. The transition from signal to sound occurred through experimentation rather than intention. In 1877, Edison and his assistants began testing mechanisms that used diaphragms and styluses to inscribe vibrations onto rotating surfaces. Early experiments involved paper, wax, and metal foils. The apparatus was crude. Precision was limited. Many attempts produced nothing intelligible. As with earlier projects, Edison treated these failures as guidance rather than discouragement. Eventually, a configuration emerged in which a diaphragm vibrated in response to sound, driving a stylus that etched patterns onto a rotating cylinder wrapped in tinfoil. When the process was reversed, when the stylus traced the grooves and vibrated, the diaphragm sound emerged. The result was faint and distorted, but recognizable. Spoken words could be heard again. Edison did not initially grasp the cultural implications of this outcome. His focus remained practical. The device could record and reproduce sound. That was sufficient. When he demonstrated it, however, reaction was immediate and intense. The idea that a machine could capture the human voice unsettled and fascinated audiences. Newspapers described the device with astonishment. The phonograph, as it came to be called, quickly overshadowed Edison's other work in public imagination. Edison responded to this attention with characteristic restraint. He did not dwell on emotional responses. He considered applications. The phonograph could record dictation. It could preserve speeches. It could reproduce music. Edison listed potential uses methodically, evaluating each for feasibility and demand. Entertainment was noted, but not emphasized initially. Edison viewed the phonograph primarily as a tool. Development continued unevenly. Early phonographs were fragile and difficult to use. Recording quality varied. Edison recognized these limitations and returned to refinement. Materials were improved. Cylinders replaced foil. Mechanisms were stabilized. Progress was incremental, marked by repeated testing and adjustment. At the same time, Edison's attention remained divided. Electric lighting and power systems demanded constant oversight. The phonograph advanced in fits and starts, shaped by available time and resources. Edison did not prioritize it consistently. As a result, others began exploring similar technologies, sometimes advancing more rapidly in specific areas. This pattern repeated throughout Edison's career. He generated ideas early, established proof of concept, then shifted focus to other pressing problems. Refinement and commercialization sometimes lagged. Edison accepted this trade-off. His interests were broad, and he trusted that viable ideas could be revisited. Sound recording also altered Edison's relationship with memory. The phonograph preserved not just information but presence. Voices could outlast speakers. This challenged assumptions about communication and time. Edison did not articulate these implications philosophically, but he recognized their significance. He understood that sound recording would change how people related to history and to one another. Motion followed a similar trajectory. As photographic technology improved and exposure times shortened, the possibility of capturing movement emerged. Edison's interest in motion pictures grew from his fascination with recorded sound and mechanical reproduction. He envisioned systems that could capture visual sequences and replay them, much as the phonograph captured sound. Early motion picture experiments involved capturing successive images rapidly and displaying them in sequence. Edison's laboratory developed devices to view these images individually, rather than projecting them to large audiences. The kinetoscope allowed a single viewer to observe moving images through a peephole. This design reflected Edison's cautious approach. Projection posed technical challenges and safety concerns. Individual viewing was manageable. As with the phonograph, Edison focused on the mechanics rather than the spectacle. He evaluated frame rates, lighting requirements, and film materials. Motion required intense illumination. Heat buildup posed risks. Edison addressed these issues through incremental design changes. Public response to motion pictures, like sound recording, exceeded Edison's expectations. People were captivated by moving images, even when content was simple. Short scenes of everyday activity drew crowds. Edison recognized commercial potential but remained measured. He did not rush to expand beyond what the technology could support reliably. Competition emerged quickly. Other inventors and entrepreneurs pursued projection systems that allowed larger audiences. Edison monitored these developments, sometimes adopting improvements, sometimes resisting them. His preference for control and reliability shaped decisions. Projection introduced variables that were difficult to manage. Edison remained cautious. The intersection of sound and motion presented additional challenges. Synchronization was difficult. Edison experimented with combining phonographs and motion devices, but results were inconsistent. He did not abandon the idea, but he did not resolve it fully during this period. The technology required further maturation. These ventures into sound and motion reinforced Edison's reputation as a figure at the edge of emerging media. Yet they also highlighted limitations in his approach. Edison excelled at system building within defined boundaries. When technologies expanded rapidly into new cultural spaces, his measured pace sometimes lagged behind market enthusiasm. Despite this, Edison's contributions established foundational frameworks. Sound recording became an industry. Motion pictures evolved into a dominant cultural form. Edison's early work shaped technical standards and commercial expectations, even when others later refined or expanded them. Within the laboratory, these projects demanded new skills. Assistants with photographic expertise joined the team. Materials science became increasingly important. Edison adapted his system to accommodate these needs, integrating new disciplines without altering core processes. Documentation remained central. Experiments were logged meticulously. Failures were recorded alongside successes. Edison's notebooks from this period reveal extensive trial and error, punctuated by incremental improvement. Progress was rarely linear. The cultural impact of these technologies began to emerge gradually. Recorded sound allowed voices to circulate beyond immediate presence. Motion images captured moments otherwise lost. These changes altered how people experienced information, entertainment, and memory. Edison observed these shifts without commentary. His role was to enable, not interpret. Financial arrangements around these technologies grew complex. Licensing, patents, and partnerships required negotiation. Edison engaged these matters pragmatically, delegating where possible. His attention remained focused on technical direction rather than market dominance. The public, meanwhile, continued to conflate Edison's diverse work into a single narrative of genius. Sound, motion, and light were presented as unified achievements. Edison did not correct this synthesis. He understood that public understanding operated at a different scale than technical reality. Within Edison's own assessment, these projects were parts of a larger pattern. They demonstrated that information, whether electrical signals, sound waves, or images, could be captured, transformed, and reproduced mechanically. This insight connected his work across domains. It reinforced his belief in systems rather than isolated devices. As years passed, Edison revisited sound recording repeatedly, improving materials and mechanisms. He did not consider the phonograph complete. Each iteration addressed specific shortcomings. This persistence reflected his broader approach. Invention did not conclude, it evolved. Motion pictures followed a similar path. Early limitations were acknowledged. Improvements were pursued selectively. Edison accepted that others might advance certain aspects faster. His concern was not ownership of an entire field, but contribution to its foundations. These technologies also expanded Edison's influence beyond infrastructure into culture. Electric light changed how people lived. Sound and motion changed how they remembered and entertained themselves. Edison recognized this expansion but did not alter his working habits in response. The laboratory remained his primary environment. Fame, cultural impact, and speculation remained secondary. Edison continued to measure success by functionality and durability. Sound and motion introduced a new dimension to Edison's legacy. They extended his influence into realms less governed by engineering constraints and more shaped by human experience. Yet even here, Edison approached the work as a problem of mechanisms and systems. Memory, once fleeting, could now be stored. Movement, once momentary, could be replayed. These capabilities emerged not through vision alone, but through sustained experimentation. Edison did not frame these developments as revolutions. He treated them as extensions of ongoing work. This perspective allowed him to remain grounded amid rapid change. As these technologies matured, Edison faced new questions about control, credit, and adaptation. The pace of innovation accelerated. Markets evolved. Cultural expectations shifted. The systems Edison built had opened new pathways. Where they led would depend on choices made beyond his laboratory. Edison observed this transition with the same calm attentiveness he applied to technical problems. The work continued. The systems expanded. Memory itself had become mechanical. Labor, credit, and power. As Thomas Edison's enterprises expanded in scale and complexity, questions that had once remained background concerns began to assert themselves more clearly. These were not questions of invention in the technical sense, but of labor, recognition, and authority. The systems Edison built depended increasingly on the work of others: engineers, machinists, chemists, draftsmen, installers, and administrators. Their efforts were essential to sustaining progress, yet public attention remained focused almost exclusively on Edison himself. This imbalance was neither accidental nor unique to Edison's era, but it carried consequences that shaped how his work unfolded. Within Edison's laboratories, roles were defined pragmatically. Assistants were hired for competence and reliability. They were expected to execute tasks efficiently, document results accurately, and adapt quickly as priorities shifted. Edison valued initiative, but within boundaries. Ideas were welcomed, but final decisions rested with him. This structure allowed work to proceed without prolonged debate, maintaining momentum across multiple projects. Credit followed a similar pattern. Patents were filed in Edison's name, even when assistants contributed significantly to development. This arrangement reflected legal norms and contractual agreements of the time. Assistants were compensated financially and gained experience, but public recognition was limited. Edison did not frame this as exploitation. He viewed the laboratory as an extension of his own work, coordinated through others. For many assistants, this arrangement was acceptable. Working at Menlo Park or its successors offered exposure to cutting-edge projects and the opportunity to develop skills. Some went on to independent careers, carrying methods learned under Edison into new contexts. Others remained within his organizations for extended periods, valuing stability and purpose. Tensions did arise, though they were often subtle. Differences in ambition, expectations, and temperament occasionally led to departures. Edison did not attempt to retain everyone. He accepted turnover as part of sustaining a demanding environment. Those who left were replaced by others willing to adapt. Labor extended beyond the laboratory. As Edison's systems moved into cities, installers, operators, and maintenance crews became critical. These workers brought electricity into homes and businesses, translating design into lived experience. Edison recognized their importance and established training protocols to ensure consistency. Standards were enforced through procedure rather than persuasion. The expansion of operations also required administrative labor. Contracts, permits, billing, and logistics demanded attention. Edison delegated these responsibilities increasingly, trusting managers to oversee daily operations. This delegation introduced distance between Edison and certain aspects of his enterprises. Decisions made at scale could no longer be personally supervised. Credit and authority intersected most visibly in public narratives. Edison's name appeared prominently in newspapers, advertisements, and official communications. This branding simplified complex systems into a single figure. It benefited business interests by creating a recognizable point of trust. Edison allowed this association to persist, understanding its practical value. Privately, Edison maintained a clear distinction between public image and internal reality. Within his organizations, he emphasized work over recognition. He expected results, not praise. This culture reinforced productivity but limited opportunities for individual distinction among staff. Legal disputes over patents and ownership further complicated questions of credit. Edison defended his claims vigorously, viewing them as essential to sustaining investment and control. Critics argued that this approach marginalized collaborators and competitors. Edison responded by pointing to the necessity of protecting systems rather than individual components. These disputes reflected broader shifts in industrial society. Innovation had become capital-intensive. Large-scale deployment required coordination and protection. Individual inventors increasingly operated within corporate frameworks. Edison's career embodied this transition. He moved from independent experimentation to organizational leadership. Power, in this context, took multiple forms. Technical power derived from control over systems and standards. Economic power flowed from patents and investment. Social power emerged through public recognition. Edison navigated these forms pragmatically, leveraging each to support continued work. This concentration of power attracted scrutiny. Critics questioned whether innovation should be so closely associated with individual figures. Others worried about monopolistic tendencies. Edison engaged these concerns selectively, focusing on compliance with legal requirements and maintaining operational stability. Within the laboratory, Edison's authority was rarely challenged openly. His decisions were accepted as final. This clarity reduced conflict but limited debate. Edison valued efficiency over consensus. He believed that prolonged discussion slowed progress. Despite this, Edison did not operate in isolation. He listened to trusted advisors and incorporated feedback when it aligned with evidence. His resistance was not to input, but to uncertainty. When data supported change, he adjusted. When it did not, he maintained course. The human cost of sustained effort was evident. Long hours and high expectations strained endurance. Some assistants experienced burnout. Edison did not address this directly. He assumed that those who could not adapt would leave. This approach prioritized output over well-being, reflecting industrial norms of the time. Family members observed similar patterns. Edison's dedication to work limited his availability. Domestic responsibilities were managed by others. Edison did not frame this as sacrifice or neglect. He viewed it as alignment with purpose. As Edison's enterprises matured, the distance between innovation and execution widened. Edison focused increasingly on direction rather than detail. Assistants and managers executed plans. This shift altered the nature of labor within the system. Creativity became more distributed, while authority remained centralized. The public continued to attribute outcomes to Edison alone. This simplification persisted despite the growing complexity of operations. Edison did not challenge it publicly. He accepted the symbolic role, recognizing its utility. Internally, credit remained functional rather than celebratory. Success was measured by performance, not recognition. This culture sustained productivity, but limited emotional investment. Work was completed because it was required, not because it would be acknowledged. Over time, this dynamic influenced how Edison's legacy would be interpreted. Histories focused on individual achievement rather than collective effort. The contributions of assistants were noted inconsistently. Edison's role as organizer and integrator overshadowed the collaborative reality. Edison himself did not reflect publicly on these issues. He remained focused on present challenges. Labor, credit, and power were tools to be managed rather than topics for contemplation. He accepted their complexities as inherent to large-scale work. As systems expanded and responsibilities multiplied, Edison's ability to oversee everything diminished. He relied increasingly on structures and procedures. Authority was exercised through organization rather than presence. This phase of Edison's career revealed the limits of individual control within industrial systems. Even as public narratives elevated him, practical power diffused across networks of labor and administration. Edison adapted by reinforcing standards and delegating authority. The balance between individual recognition and collective effort remained unresolved. Edison's career exemplified both the possibilities and tensions of industrial innovation. His systems depended on many hands, guided by a single direction. In navigating these dynamics, Edison demonstrated a form of leadership grounded in function rather than empathy. He prioritized results over relationships. This approach sustained output, but shaped the human experience of work. As the years progressed, these structures became more entrenched. Edison's role shifted further toward oversight. The laboratory culture he established continued, even as personnel changed. Labor sustained invention, credit shaped perception, power maintained order. Edison operated at the intersection of all three, managing them as components of a larger system. The systems he built endured not because they were fair or harmonious, but because they functioned. Edison measured success accordingly: family and private silence. As Thomas Edison's public life expanded and his professional responsibilities multiplied, his private life followed a quieter, more constrained path. This was not the result of secrecy or deliberate withdrawal, but of a consistent prioritization that had been present since his youth. Work remained the organizing principle of his days, and everything else arranged itself around that center. Family existed within this structure, shaped by it rather than shaping it in return. Edison's marriage to Mary Stilwell in 1871 coincided with a period of growing ambition and increasing workload. Mary was young, practical, and accustomed to domestic responsibility. Their household provided stability, but it was not a space Edison lingered in. Long hours at the laboratory, frequent travel, and irregular schedules meant that much of family life unfolded without him. This absence was not accompanied by conflict or explanation. It was simply the pattern that emerged. Edison did not articulate expectations for domestic life, nor did he negotiate them actively. He assumed that work came first, and that other needs would be managed accordingly. This assumption reflected broader cultural norms of the time, particularly among men engaged in industrial and technical pursuits. The separation between public labour and private life was accepted rather than examined. Children entered this arrangement with little alteration. Edison's presence in their early years was limited, shaped by proximity rather than engagement. He observed rather than participated. Routine moments, meals, lessons, conversations often occurred in his absence. When he was present, attention tended to drift back toward work. This did not reflect indifference, but a mind trained to prioritize problems over interactions. Silence played a significant role in Edison's private life. His partial deafness reduced casual conversation and spontaneous exchange. Sound was not a constant medium for him. This created a household dynamic in which communication was functional rather than expressive. Instructions were given. Information was exchanged. Emotional nuance remained understated. Mary Stilwell's health declined over time, culminating in her death in 1884. During her illness, Edison's routine changed little. Work continued. Responsibility for care fell largely to others. This response was not widely remarked upon at the time, but it illustrated the limits of Edison's emotional engagement. He did not withdraw into grief publicly. He did not pause operations. Loss was absorbed quietly and life proceeded. Edison remarried 2 years later to Mina Miller, a woman with different background and temperament. Mina was better educated, more socially engaged, and more aware of Edison's public position. She brought greater structure to domestic life and navigated social obligations Edison preferred to avoid. Their marriage created a more organized household, but it did not fundamentally alter Edison's priorities. Mina assumed responsibility for managing family affairs, hosting guests, and maintaining social connections. This arrangement suited Edison. It allowed him to focus on work while preserving a functional domestic environment. Emotional intimacy remained limited, shaped by Edison's reserve and routine. Home for Edison was not a retreat. It was a place of rest between periods of work, not a source of renewal or reflection. He did not cultivate leisure activities. He did not seek distraction. Even during moments of inactivity, his attention often returned to unresolved problems. This inward focus created distance not only within family life, but within social relationships more broadly. Edison maintained professional networks but few close friendships. Interaction was purposeful. Conversation centered on work or logistics. Personal disclosure was rare. The contrast between Edison's public prominence and private silence became more pronounced as his fame grew. Public narratives depicted him as tireless and driven, often ignoring the domestic costs of such focus. Edison did not correct these narratives. He did not offer personal commentary. Silence remained his default. Children raised within this environment adapted in different ways. Some accepted the distance as normal. Others sought connection elsewhere. Edison did not intervene actively. He assumed that independence was beneficial, reflecting his own upbringing. Emotional guidance was minimal. Expectations were implicit rather than stated. Edison's deafness continued to shape domestic interaction. Miscommunication occurred. Nuance was lost. Edison relied increasingly on written notes or intermediaries. This reduced spontaneity and reinforced functional exchange. Silence became both a practical condition and an emotional boundary. Despite these limitations, Edison did not view his private life as lacking. He did not compare it to alternatives. Work provided purpose and continuity. Family existed within that framework. Emotional fulfillment was not a category he pursued consciously. As Edison aged, this pattern persisted. Domestic routines stabilized under Mina's management. Edison remained peripheral to daily family life, present physically but distant mentally. Evenings were often spent reviewing notes or resting briefly before returning to work. Illness and fatigue did not prompt reflection. Edison treated physical decline as inconvenience rather than signal. He adjusted schedules but did not reevaluate priorities. Silence continued to characterize his inner life. The absence of expressive emotion did not mean absence of attachment. Edison valued continuity and reliability. He expressed care through provision and stability, rather than affection. This form of connection was consistent with his approach to work, function over expression. Public expectations occasionally intruded into private space. Visitors sought glimpses of Edison at home. Interviews extended beyond laboratories. Edison tolerated these intrusions without enthusiasm. Home remained secondary to work, even when observed. The contrast between Edison's ability to shape systems and his reluctance to engage emotionally underscores a central tension in his life. He excelled at organizing processes and solving technical problems. He struggled with ambiguity and emotional exchange. This tension was not resolved. Edison did not seek resolution. He accepted his own limitations without comment. Silence was not experienced as absence, but as normal condition. As years passed, the domestic sphere remained stable but unremarkable. No dramatic conflicts emerged. No reconciliations altered course. Life continued in steady rhythm, shaped by habit. Edison's private silence mirrored his public restraint. He avoided grand statements and emotional display in both realms. This consistency reinforced his focus, but limited connection. In historical accounts, this aspect of Edison's life is often condensed or omitted. It does not fit easily into narratives of innovation and progress, yet it formed the backdrop against which his work unfolded. Family life provided continuity but not refuge. Silence provided space but not reflection. Edison's inner world remained largely inaccessible, even to those closest to him. This distance did not impede his work. If anything, it sustained it. Emotional engagement might have diverted energy from persistent effort. Edison accepted this trade-off implicitly. As the century advanced, Edison's public role would continue to evolve. His private patterns would remain largely unchanged. Silence would persist as a defining feature of his personal life. The man who transformed sound into memory and light into infrastructure remained, in his own household, quiet and reserved. His systems spoke for him. His private voice remained low. The story moved forward, shaped by forces beyond domestic walls. Edison remained at work, as always. Industry outpaces the inventor. As the 19th century moved toward its close, the industrial landscape that Thomas Edison had helped shape began to change in ways that were both predictable and difficult to control. The systems he pioneered, laboratories organized for continuous experimentation, electrical networks designed for reliability, and companies structured around patents had proven effective. They had also grown beyond the scale at which any single individual, however disciplined, could fully direct them. Industry was accelerating, and it was doing so on terms increasingly independent of the inventor who had helped set its foundations. This shift did not arrive as a rupture. It unfolded gradually, through decisions that seemed reasonable in isolation. Companies expanded. Operations multiplied. Layers of management were added to coordinate production, distribution, and finance. Edison, who had once overseen experiments personally and followed installations closely, now found himself further removed from daily execution. The distance was not intentional withdrawal. It was a consequence of growth. Electrical enterprises in particular demanded scale. Power stations required capital investment. Distribution networks required coordination with municipalities, property owners, and regulators. Maintenance required trained personnel operating according to standardized procedures. Edison had contributed decisively to establishing these structures, but sustaining them required administrative machinery that operated continuously, often without his direct involvement. Corporate consolidation intensified this process. As electrical companies merged and expanded, decision-making shifted toward boards, executives, and financiers. Edison retained influence, particularly through patents and reputation, but his role increasingly resembled that of a guiding figure rather than an operational leader. Strategic direction mattered more than technical detail. Edison adapted, but not without friction. The pace of technological change also accelerated. New materials, methods, and theories emerged rapidly. Academic research began to influence industrial practice more directly. Edison, whose approach had always favored experimentation over formal theory, sometimes found himself outpaced by developments that moved quickly from laboratory to market. He monitored these trends but did not attempt to master every new domain. This was not a decline in capability, but a shift in context. The problems Edison had solved early in his career were those of feasibility and integration. By the late 19th century, many of these questions had been answered. The challenges now involved optimization, standardization, and expansion at scale. These tasks favored organizations over individuals. Edison's laboratories continued to operate, but their relative position changed. What had once been pioneering environments became part of a broader ecosystem of research and development. Universities, corporate laboratories, and government-funded institutions began contributing significantly to technological progress. Edison's model had been adopted, adapted, and multiplied. Within this environment, Edison's influence remained substantial but less singular. He contributed ideas, reviewed projects, and guided priorities. He no longer set the tempo for the entire field. Industry moved according to its own momentum, shaped by market demand, regulatory frameworks, and collective innovation. This transition affected Edison's relationship to control. Earlier in his career, control had been exercised through direct involvement, hands-on experimentation, immediate decision-making, and personal oversight. As systems expanded, control became abstract, mediated through structures and policies. Edison adjusted reluctantly, recognizing necessity but preferring tangible engagement. Frustrations emerged, though they were rarely expressed publicly. Edison observed decisions being made that prioritized short-term returns over long-term reliability. He noted compromises that would have troubled him earlier, yet he understood that the scale of operations imposed constraints different from those of a laboratory. Trade-offs were unavoidable. The electrical industry's expansion also intensified competition. New companies entered the field with alternative approaches, often leveraging academic research and novel financing. Edison's earlier dominance gave way to pluralism. Multiple systems coexisted. Innovation became distributed across many actors. Edison responded by narrowing focus. Rather than attempting to influence every development, he concentrated on areas where his experience offered clear advantage. He reviewed designs, advised on reliability, and advocated for cautious deployment. His voice carried weight, even when it did not determine outcomes. Public perception during this period shifted subtly. Edison remained celebrated, but the narrative of solitary genius began to strain under the weight of industrial complexity. Newspapers continued to reference him as a central figure, yet attention increasingly turned toward companies and systems rather than individuals. Progress appeared institutional rather than personal. Edison's own behavior reflected this change. He spent less time traveling to installations and more time reviewing reports. His presence at laboratories became intermittent, Delegation increased. Trusted associates managed operations. Edison intervened selectively, focusing on critical decisions. This distance altered his daily routine. While work remained central, its nature changed. Physical experimentation gave way to evaluation and oversight. Edison read more, wrote directives, and participated in meetings. The shift required patience and adaptation. Emotionally, Edison remained steady. He did not express nostalgia for earlier periods of hands-on work. He accepted change as a condition of progress. Yet he did not conceal preference for environments where effort translated directly into result. Industry's momentum also influenced Edison's later projects. He pursued ventures that aligned with existing structures rather than attempting to disrupt them entirely. This pragmatism reduced risk but limited transformative potential. Edison's work became more conservative, oriented toward refinement rather than reinvention. The broader economic context reinforced this trend. Markets favored reliability and scale. Investors sought predictable returns. Radical departures faced resistance. Edison's cautious approach fit these conditions, even as it constrained experimentation. The inventor's identity itself evolved during this period. Edison was no longer simply someone who created devices. He was a figure associated with an era of industrialization. His name represented a body of work rather than ongoing innovation. Edison accepted this role without comment. Within his organizations, younger engineers and managers assumed greater responsibility. They brought new perspectives and methods. Edison listened, but maintained authority over final decisions. The balance between tradition and adaptation required constant adjustment. Some projects faltered, others succeeded modestly. Edison did not measure these outcomes against past triumphs. He evaluated them on their own terms. Success was relative, shaped by context. The sense that industry had begun to outpace the inventor did not imply irrelevance. Edison's contributions remained foundational. His methods influenced how work was organized. His standards shaped expectations. Yet the center of gravity had shifted. Edison's relationship with technology became more reflective, though not introspective. He observed developments, assessed their implications, and responded selectively. He did not attempt to reclaim centrality. He continued contributing where possible. This period underscored the difference between initiating change and sustaining it. Edison excelled at the former. The latter required institutions that could operate independently. Edison had helped create such institutions, even as they moved beyond his direct control. The transformation of industry also altered Edison's legacy in real time. He became a reference point rather than a participant in every advance. His earlier work was cited, built upon, and sometimes surpassed. Edison did not contest this progression. The systems he had helped establish continued to evolve. Electrical networks expanded, media technologies matured, research organizations multiplied. Edison's influence persisted through these channels, embedded in structures rather than actions. As the new century approached, Edison stood at an inflection point. He remained active, engaged, and respected, yet the world he had helped create now moved at a pace and scale that no longer revolved around any single figure. Industry had grown beyond invention as personal endeavor. It had become collective, institutional, and self-sustaining. Edison recognized this reality and adapted accordingly. The inventor had not been eclipsed. He had been absorbed into the system he helped build. Setbacks and stubborn hope. As Thomas Edison entered the later stages of his career, the rhythm of his work changed again, not through any sudden decision, but through the accumulation of limits. Age introduced physical fatigue. Industry imposed organizational distance. Technology advanced along paths that did not always align with his instincts. Yet Edison did not retreat. He adjusted. Setbacks became more frequent, but so did his determination to continue working within the frameworks he trusted. One of the defining features of this period was Edison's willingness to pursue projects that others regarded as marginal or unpromising. He did not interpret skepticism as a signal to stop. He interpreted it as a condition to be tested. This attitude had served him well earlier in life, when persistence often converted doubt into acceptance. In later years, however, conditions had changed. Markets were less forgiving. Competition was faster. Capital flowed towards scalable returns rather than experimental refinement. Edison's ventures into improved storage batteries illustrate this shift clearly. He believed deeply in the potential of efficient, durable energy storage, particularly for transportation and industrial use. Electric vehicles, still a nascent concept, depended on reliable batteries. Edison devoted years to refining battery chemistry, convinced that incremental improvements could unlock broader adoption. The work was demanding and uncertain. Materials behaved unpredictably. Performance gains were modest. Costs remained high. Edison persisted nonetheless, investing time and resources long after others had lost interest. This persistence was not nostalgic. Edison did not seek to relive earlier triumphs. He believed the problem itself remained unsolved and therefore worth attention. Results were mixed. Edison's battery achieved durability improvements but failed to meet the performance thresholds required for widespread use. Competing technologies advanced more quickly. Market interest waned. Edison acknowledged these outcomes without dramatization. The project had not delivered transformative success, but it had produced useful knowledge. For Edison, that distinction mattered. Other projects during this period followed similar patterns. Edison explored improvements in materials, industrial processes, and mechanical systems. Some yielded modest commercial returns. Others faded quietly. The balance between effort and reward shifted. Edison accepted this imbalance as part of sustained work. Setbacks also emerged from decisions made earlier. Infrastructure choices, patent strategies, and system designs that had once been advantageous now imposed constraints. Edison encountered the consequences of earlier caution, particularly in areas where alternative approaches gained dominance. He recognized these realities without attempting to rewrite history. Public reaction to these developments was uneven. Newspapers continued to report on Edison's activities, often framing them as signs of continued genius or impending resurgence. When projects failed to meet expectations, disappointment was sometimes exaggerated. Edison did not respond publicly to these narratives. He allowed attention to rise and fall without intervention. Privately, Edison's outlook remained steady. He did not measure his worth by recent outcomes alone. He evaluated progress across long timelines. A project that did not succeed commercially could still contribute to understanding. This perspective insulated him from discouragement. Physical endurance became a limiting factor. Edison's work habits adjusted slightly. He rested more frequently. Tasks were delegated more often. Yet his engagement remained intense. He reviewed data, questioned assumptions, and proposed modifications. The tempo slowed, but the process continued. Edison's stubbornness, often noted by observers, took on a different character in this phase. Earlier, it had driven persistence through uncertainty. Now, it functioned as resistance to disengagement. Edison refused to become purely symbolic. He did not wish to be remembered solely for past achievements, while remaining idle in the present. This determination sometimes led to miscalculations. Edison invested in ideas that did not align with market conditions. He underestimated the speed at which competitors could iterate. He overestimated the value of durability relative to efficiency in certain contexts. These errors were not the result of ignorance, but of priorities shaped by long experience. Within his organizations, younger engineers and managers recognized these tensions. Some advocated for bolder shifts. Others supported Edison's cautious refinement. The resulting dynamic required negotiation. Edison listened, but maintained authority. He adjusted selectively, not comprehensively. Hope, in this context, was not optimism about specific outcomes. It was confidence in process. Edison believed that sustained effort, applied methodically, would eventually yield value, even if not immediately visible. This belief sustained him through projects that lacked clear milestones. The cultural environment of the early 20th century reinforced both opportunity and challenge. Technological change accelerated. New industries emerged rapidly. Public appetite for novelty increased. Edison observed these shifts with interest but did not chase them indiscriminately. He preferred problems that demanded persistence rather than spectacle. Setbacks accumulated quietly. Some projects ended without resolution. Others were shelved indefinitely. Edison did not announce these conclusions. He simply redirected attention. This fluidity prevented stagnation, even as it limited closure. The balance between hope and realism defined this phase of Edison's life. He no longer expected dramatic breakthroughs. He expected gradual improvement. When improvement failed to materialize, he accepted the result and moved on. Public perception lagged behind this internal adjustment. Edison continued to be portrayed as a tireless innovator on the brink of new revolutions. This narrative persisted because it was familiar and comforting. Edison did not correct it, but he did not rely on it either. Family members observed these patterns from a distance. Edison's engagement with work remained central. Setbacks did not prompt withdrawal into private life. Hope remained attached to activity rather than outcome. As Edison aged, the physical act of experimentation became less frequent, but the mental process continued. He reviewed designs, assessed failures, and proposed alternatives. The laboratory remained his preferred environment, even as his presence there diminished. Stubborn hope, in this sense, was not denial, it was refusal to disengage. Edison accepted limitations without surrendering agency. He continued working because work defined continuity. The measure of success shifted further from public acclaim to internal consistency. Edison valued alignment between effort and belief. If he believed a problem mattered, he pursued it, regardless of external validation. This approach did not guarantee reward. It did, however, preserve purpose. Edison remained engaged with the present, not confined to memory. As the years progressed, the accumulation of setbacks did not erode Edison's confidence in method. It refined it. He became more selective, more deliberate, and more realistic. Hope persisted, tempered by experience. The inventor who had once reshaped daily life now worked within narrower margins. Yet he continued contributing where possible, guided by habits formed long ago. Setbacks did not define this phase. Persistence did. Hope endured not as expectation of triumph, but as commitment to effort. Edison moved forward, steady and unresolved, carrying work into a changing world, a changing American century. As the 20th century advanced, the country Thomas Edison inhabited no longer resembled the one that had shaped his early habits. America moved faster now, not only in transportation and communication, but in expectation. Cities expanded upward and outward, industries consolidated, scientific research grew more specialized. The pace of change no longer felt incremental. It felt continuous, layered, and accelerating. Edison did not resist this transformation, but he experienced it from a different vantage point than those who had grown up within it. Edison's formative years had unfolded in a nation still discovering its industrial identity. In that world, invention emerged from practical necessity, guided by observation and trial. By contrast, the new century increasingly framed innovation as a managed endeavour, structured through institutions, funding cycles, and formal research programs. Universities, corporations, and government agencies now played central roles. Edison had anticipated aspects of this shift through his laboratory model, yet the scale and speed exceeded anything he had envisioned. Electricity, once experimental, had become assumed. Lights turned on without ceremony. power flowed invisibly. Few people paused to consider the systems that made this possible. Edison regarded this normalization as a success. Technologies, in his view, achieved their purpose when they faded into routine. Yet this invisibility also altered public memory. The origins of systems became less relevant than their performance. Edison's presence in this landscape was increasingly symbolic. He was invited to ceremonies, consulted on broad questions, and referenced in discussions of progress. His opinions carried weight, though they were often sought for validation rather than direction. Edison accepted these roles selectively. He preferred engagement with concrete problems to abstract commentary. The structure of work had also evolved. Younger engineers entered fields already populated by standards, protocols, and established practices. Their challenges differed from Edison's early struggles. They optimized rather than pioneered. Edison observed these developments with interest, recognizing both their necessity and their limitations. Innovation now depended on coordination across many actors. Individual influence was diluted. Despite this, Edison remained active. He continued visiting laboratories, reviewing reports, and advising on projects. His focus shifted toward assessment rather than creation. He evaluated proposals based on feasibility, reliability, and alignment with existing systems. This evaluative role suited his experience, even as it distanced him from hands-on experimentation. The cultural atmosphere of the era also changed. Public fascination with technology intensified, but it became intertwined with spectacle. New inventions were unveiled with ceremony and rhetoric. Edison found this emphasis uncomfortable. He had always preferred demonstration over announcement. He tolerated publicity, but did not embrace it. World events further reshaped the context in which Edison worked. Industrial capacity became linked to national power. Technologies were evaluated for strategic value. Edison participated in advisory roles, contributing his perspective on reliability and production. He approached these responsibilities with the same pragmatism he applied elsewhere, focusing on practical outcomes rather than ideology. The relationship between science and industry grew closer. Theoretical advances translated more quickly into applications. Edison, whose approach had emphasized experimentation over formal theory, acknowledged these changes without altering his core method. He continued to trust results over equations, performance over prediction. As the century progressed, Edison's physical presence diminished, but his routines remained. He worked daily, read extensively, and maintained correspondence. Age introduced constraints, but not disengagement. Edison adapted schedules and delegated tasks, preserving involvement where possible. The public increasingly viewed Edison as a bridge between eras. He had lived through transformations that younger generations took for granted. Interviews and profiles highlighted this continuity, often framing Edison as a witness to progress. Edison did not contest this framing, though he did not dwell on memory. His attention remained forward-facing. Technological optimism defined much of the era. New machines promised efficiency, comfort, and growth. Edison shared some of this optimism, but tempered it with experience. He had seen how systems failed and how unintended consequences emerged. He advocated caution and testing, emphasizing reliability over novelty. This perspective sometimes placed him at odds with prevailing enthusiasm. Edison did not oppose innovation, but he questioned haste. He reminded audiences that technologies entered daily life gradually, through adaptation rather than disruption. His voice added restraint to conversations often driven by excitement. The organization of work continued to evolve. Corporations expanded research departments, teams grew larger, decision-making became layered. Edison recognized these developments as extensions of the system he had helped initiate, even as they moved beyond his direct influence. In this environment, Edison's personal legacy began to solidify. Museums collected his artifacts, institutions documented his contributions. Edison observed these efforts with mild detachment. He did not participate actively in shaping his historical image. He allowed others to interpret his work. Daily life for Edison remained structured by habit. He rose early, engaged with work, and rested intermittently. Leisure did not assume greater importance with age. Purpose remained tied to activity. Even as tasks changed, engagement persisted. The contrast between Edison's steady routines and the rapid transformation around him underscored a central theme of his life. Progress did not require constant reinvention of self. It required continuity of effort. Edison embodied this principle, even as the world around him accelerated. Public expectations sometimes exceeded reality. Edison was asked to comment on fields far removed from his expertise. He responded cautiously, limiting remarks to areas he understood. He resisted becoming a general authority on all matters technological. As industries matured, the focus of innovation shifted toward refinement and integration. Edison had long emphasized these qualities. His perspective remained relevant, even if his direct involvement diminished. He continued advising on matters of durability and system design. The American century unfolded around him, shaped by forces he had influenced but could no longer guide. Edison accepted this transition without resistance. He did not seek to reclaim centrality. He continued contributing within his capacity. The normalization of technology altered how people perceived change. Innovations arrived faster, but attention spans shortened. Edison's patience contrasted with this tempo. He valued sustained effort over rapid turnover. Within his family, the rhythms of daily life continued quietly. Edison's presence remained limited but consistent. Work structured interactions, silence persisted. As the world moved toward new forms of communication, transportation, and industry, Edison's earlier achievements receded into infrastructure. They supported progress invisibly. Edison regarded this invisibility as success. The changing century presented challenges Edison could not fully address. He acknowledged limitations without regret. He focused on areas where his experience mattered. The measure of his influence shifted from immediate impact to enduring foundation. Systems he had helped establish continued operating, evolving beyond his oversight. Edison's life intersected with history at a moment of transition. He had participated actively in shaping one era and witnessed the emergence of another. This dual perspective informed his later years, even as he avoided reflection. The world no longer waited for Edison's inventions to define its direction. It moved forward through collective momentum. Edison remained engaged, attentive, and grounded. As the century progressed, Edison's role became one of continuity. He represented a link between origins and outcomes. His presence reminded others that progress was built through persistence. The changing American century did not leave Edison behind. It absorbed him into its fabric. He continued working, observing, and contributing, even as the scale of change exceeded individual influence. The story moved forward, carried by systems rather than figures. Edison remained within it, steady and watchful. Legacy, while still alive. By the time Thomas Edison reached his later years, legacy was no longer a future concern. It had become a present condition. Institutions referenced his work. Newspapers summarized his achievements as though they were already complete. Younger engineers spoke of him in the past tense, even while he continued to work. Edison occupied an unusual position, active, alert, and engaged, yet increasingly treated as a figure belonging to history rather than to ongoing development. This shift did not occur abruptly. It emerged through repetition. Anniversaries of inventions were commemorated. Public events invited Edison as an honored presence rather than a working participant. Articles recounted his early struggles and breakthroughs, often simplifying them into digestible narratives. Edison observed these developments with a mixture of acceptance and detachment. He did not resist being recognized. He simply did not allow recognition to dictate how he lived. Legacy, as it formed around him, emphasized outcomes over process. The electric light, the phonograph, motion pictures, power systems, these were listed as achievements, often presented as completed accomplishments. What was less visible was the ongoing labour of maintenance, revision and adaptation that Edison knew never truly ended. Systems persisted only through continuous attention. Edison understood this distinction, even as public memory solidified around milestones. Edison's continued activity complicated these narratives. He remained involved in experiments, consultations, and evaluations. He visited laboratories when health permitted. He reviewed technical reports. He offered opinions grounded in experience. Yet these actions received less attention than his past successes. Edison accepted this imbalance without complaint. Public honours increased. Awards, medals, and honorary degrees were offered. Edison accepted some, declined others, and rarely commented on their significance. He did not view recognition as validation. He viewed it as acknowledgement of work already done. It neither added nor subtracted from his sense of purpose. The process of being historicized while alive introduced a subtle distance between Edison and the present. Conversations increasingly framed him as a reference point rather than a contributor. Questions focused on recollection rather than current projects. Edison answered politely but briefly. He did not linger in memory. He preferred to discuss practical matters. Within his organizations, this shift was also evident. Decision-making increasingly rested with managers and engineers who had grown up within the systems Edison helped create. They respected his authority but did not rely on it exclusively. Edison's role became advisory rather than directive. He accepted this transition as necessary. The consolidation of Edison's legacy was shaped by institutions beyond his control. Museums curated artifacts. Biographers began outlining narratives. Educational materials simplified his career into lessons about perseverance and ingenuity. Edison did not intervene. He allowed interpretation to proceed independently. This passivity was not indifference. Edison recognized that once work entered public memory, it belonged to others. Interpretation would vary. Accuracy would fluctuate. He did not attempt to correct every misrepresentation. He focused instead on the present, however limited his role within it had become. The contrast between public memory and lived experience remained stark. Edison's days were still structured by routine. He read, reviewed, and reflected quietly. He engaged with technical questions when possible. The tempo was slower, but the orientation remained forward. Family life continued with minimal change. Edison's presence was consistent but reserved. Domestic routines were stable. Silence persisted. Legacy, in this private context, was not discussed. Work remained the common thread. As Edison aged, physical limitations became more apparent. Fatigue increased. Mobility decreased. These changes constrained activity but did not alter intention. Edison adapted by delegating more and focusing on mental engagement. He remained curious, attentive, and disciplined. The public often interpreted Edison's reduced visibility as withdrawal. In reality, it was adjustment. Edison continued participating within his capacity. He did not announce retirement. He did not mark an end. Work simply evolved. The idea of legacy raised questions Edison did not articulate openly. How would his contributions be remembered? Which aspects would endure? Which would fade? Edison did not speculate publicly. He trusted that systems spoke more clearly than narratives. If they functioned, they justified themselves. This trust extended to his view of history. Edison did not seek to shape his place within it. He assumed that outcomes would determine relevance. Personal intent mattered less than effect. This perspective aligned with his lifelong emphasis on function over expression. Interactions with younger generations reinforced this outlook. Edison observed new engineers working within established frameworks, improving efficiency and extending reach. He recognized that their work depended on foundations laid earlier. He did not expect acknowledgement. continuity mattered more than credit. The experience of witnessing one's own legacy unfold in real time introduced a form of quiet separation. Edison remained present, yet increasingly external to the narratives that defined him. He accepted this condition as inevitable. Public celebrations of his life occasionally emphasized moments of drama or genius. Edison regarded these portrayals with mild amusement. They did not reflect his experience of work, which had been routine, repetitive, and often unremarkable. He did not correct the record. He allowed the simplification to stand. The institutionalization of Edison's legacy also involved preservation. Artifacts were catalogued. Documents were archived. Laboratories were remembered as sites of origin. Edison observed these efforts without sentimentality. Preservation did not replace function. It documented it. In private moments, Edison did not engage in reflection about meaning or impact. He did not seek closure. His attention remained anchored to tasks at hand, however small. This continuity provided stability as external perceptions shifted. The process of becoming a legacy while alive also highlighted the limits of individual agency. Edison had influenced systems that now operated independently. Their evolution no longer depended on his input. He recognized this transition as part of progress. Edison's role as a living reference point carried responsibility. He was careful with statements, aware that his words could be amplified. He avoided speculation. He emphasized caution and experience. His tone remained measured. The cultural environment continued to evolve rapidly. New technologies emerged that Edison did not fully engage with. He observed them without resentment. He understood that innovation had moved into domains shaped by different tools and methods. Legacy, in this context, became less about personal identity and more about structural influence. Edison's methods, systematic experimentation, integration, persistence, had been absorbed into industrial practice. His presence remained in process rather than personality. As the years advanced, Edison's engagement with the world narrowed physically but not mentally. He remained interested in outcomes. He continued evaluating ideas. He did not disengage from thought. The public increasingly spoke of Edison in reverent terms. He accepted this quietly. Reverence did not alter daily routine. Work, however limited, continued. The experience of watching one's own life become history did not prompt reflection or nostalgia. Edison did not recount stories unless asked. He did not revisit achievements. He focused on continuity rather than conclusion. Legacy formed around him as a structure others built. Edison remained within it but did not inhabit it emotionally. He allowed distance to grow without resistance. The systems he had helped create continued functioning. Electricity flowed. Sound was recorded. Images moved. These outcomes mattered more to Edison than how they were remembered. As his life entered its final chapter, Edison remained consistent. He did not seek summation. He did not offer final statements. He continued working as long as possible. Legacy for Edison was not an endpoint. It was an accumulation. It existed alongside life rather than after it. He lived within it without comment. The inventor who had shaped modern routines now lived quietly within the world those routines sustained. His presence was steady, understated, and largely unremarked in daily operation. History gathered around him. Edison continued forward, attentive to the present, the quiet end of invention. In the final years of Thomas Edison's life, activity narrowed without disappearing. Work no longer filled entire days, yet it remained the organizing force around which time arranged itself. Physical strength declined gradually. Endurance shortened. Tasks that once demanded little effort now required planning and rest. Edison adjusted without comment. He did not interpret limitation as loss. He treated it as a condition to be managed. By this stage, Edison's direct involvement in invention was selective. He reviewed ideas rather than generating them from raw materials. He evaluated proposals instead of constructing devices. He relied on reports, diagrams, and summaries prepared by others. The laboratory remained important, but Edison's presence there was intermittent. He accepted this change as practical rather than symbolic. Despite reduced physical engagement, Edison's mental habits persisted. He asked precise questions. He focused on reliability and feasibility. He dismissed speculation unsupported by evidence. His attention remained fixed on function. Even as the scope of his influence contracted, the method remained intact. Public life receded further into formality. Invitations continued, but Edison declined most. Travel was limited. Appearances were brief. When he did attend events, he spoke little. His presence carried weight without requiring explanation. He did not perform, he observed. At home, routines simplified. Days followed predictable patterns. Reading occupied much of his time. Correspondence continued at a slower pace. Edison dictated or wrote short notes. Silence, long familiar, deepened. It was not experienced as isolation but as continuity. Family members adapted to these rhythms. Domestic life proceeded quietly. Conversations were brief and functional. Edison did not reflect openly on his life or achievements. He did not offer lessons or summaries. He did not frame his experiences as guidance for others. He remained focused on the present moment. Illness appeared intermittently, managed without drama. Edison approached health issues pragmatically, as he had approached technical problems. Symptoms were addressed, schedules were adjusted. He did not dwell on prognosis. He did not engage in speculation about duration or outcome. The world outside continued to change rapidly. New technologies emerged that Edison did not actively engage with. Radio, aviation, and other developments reshaped society. Edison observed these trends with interest, but without urgency. He recognized that innovation had moved into domains requiring different methods and perspectives. Public commentary increasingly framed Edison's life as complete. Articles summarized his career. Biographies appeared. Edison did not participate in shaping these accounts. He allowed others to interpret his work. Accuracy varied. He did not intervene. This distance from narrative extended to emotion. Edison did not express pride or regret publicly. He did not articulate satisfaction or disappointment. His demeanor remained consistent with habits formed decades earlier. Work had been his language. Silence remained its companion. In the laboratory environments that continued operating under his name, work proceeded according to established standards. Edison's influence persisted through procedure rather than presence. Decisions were made based on criteria he had emphasized. Reliability, durability, and integration remained priorities. The quiet end of invention did not arrive as a moment. There was no final breakthrough, no concluding project. Work diminished gradually. Engagement narrowed. Edison's role shifted from participant to observer, then to reference. As physical activity declined, Edison spent more time listening when possible and reading. He remained attentive to reports from trusted associates. He offered guidance sparingly. His interventions were concise. He did not attempt to direct large initiatives. He accepted that others now carried responsibility. Death, when it approached, was not anticipated through reflection. Edison did not speak about it publicly. He did not prepare statements or offer summations. He did not frame his life as a narrative with beginning, middle, and end. For him, life had been a sequence of problems addressed and tasks completed. When Edison died in 1931, the response was immediate and widespread. Lights dimmed in tribute, newspapers recounted achievements, public figures issued statements. Edison did not witness this response. He had not anticipated it. He had not requested it. What remained after his death were systems. Electric power networks continued operating. Sound recording evolved. Motion pictures expanded. The methods Edison had employed, persistent experimentation, system integration, tolerance for failure, had been absorbed into industrial practice. The quiet end of invention was not a withdrawal from relevance. It was a transition from activity to consequence. Edison's influence shifted fully into structures that no longer required his presence. He left behind no final message, no summation of belief, no reflection on meaning. The work itself remained. In this sense, Edison's life ended as it had been lived, without ceremony, without dramatic punctuation, with continuity rather than closure. The inventor who had helped bring light into daily life did not mark his own departure. The systems he built continued functioning, indifferent to individual absence. Electricity flowed, voices were recorded, images moved. These outcomes persisted without commentary. The quiet end of invention did not diminish what came before. It completed it, not through declaration, but through endurance.